Okay, we are going to reconvene the Oregon Transportation Commission. We are in lovely Grant County in John Day, Oregon. And next we have an informational item to engage in a discussion about state and federal tolling policy and congestion pricing policy, and really an overview of some of the details thereof. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Brower.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. For the record, I'm Travis Brower, ODOT's Assistant Director, and we are here today to really start an in-depth discussion with you on tolling and congestion pricing policy. You'll recall for those of you who were on the Commission a little over a year ago, we had Cambridge Systematics come in and with ODOT give you a overview of some of the tolling and congestion pricing policy. That was before the legislature passed HB 2017 as sort of a precursor to what we knew was going to be coming. And now, obviously, you have a task in front of you. So today, we are going to walk through some of the issues to really start building that foundation of policy knowledge and then show you the edifice of policy that you're going to be building as you move forward through congestion pricing. I have with me today Russ Kassler. He is our tolling program manager. This is his first time in front of the Commission, so it is appropriate to haze him.
These are just questions. So I have a couple. And
And that, to be honest, is really the purpose of today. We're going to talk and give you a fairly high-level overview, knowing that there's no outcome we need today other than for you to gain some understanding and to give us a sense of what issues are on your mind so that we can begin this dialogue and begin working through some of these issues. We need to know what you need to know, what you don't know, what you want to know, etc. So we are going to talk about, starting off with two of the primary objectives of tolling: congestion management and transportation funding. And then we're going to talk about the federal policy and legal framework. We'll go through the state laws and rules. We talked a little bit about some of that earlier around the State Highway Fund, constitutional restriction. And then Russ is going to talk about some of the key tolling policy areas, 4 of them in particular, that you're going to be diving into in the future. This is going to be one of those interactive discussions, so don't wait for us to finish our presentation. If you have a question, dive on in and just ask away. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Kassler now, and he can talk you through tolling objectives.
Thanks, Travis. For the record, Chair Boehne, members of the Commission, my name is Russ Kassler. I'm the tolling program manager within ODOT's Office of Innovation. As Travis mentioned, there are 2 primary objectives that toll authorities seek to accomplish by pricing a roadway, bridge, or tunnel, and those are congestion management and transportation funding. This may seem obvious, especially to those of you who have been participating in the Value Pricing Policy Advisory Committee. But it's important to start with this conversation because the primary objective of a tolling project will dictate various technological features of the project and, importantly, as we're here to talk about today, some of the policy decisions that you as commissioners will be asked to make. And while these objectives are not mutually exclusive, certainly congestion management projects can produce revenue and funding projects can manage congestion. There are common features of each kind of project that should be understood early in the process, especially by a new toll authority that may be seeking to accomplish both goals, either in the same project or in the same corridor. So generally speaking, in projects that seek to produce transportation funding, these are some of the features that we see around the country, and that's fixed or variable pricing. And there will be some terms that I throw out here. There's an attached glossary for those of you who are less familiar with some of the terminology. If I hop into jargon, you can ask questions and let me know. But fixed pricing is exactly what it sounds like. It's a flat toll. Variable pricing is a toll that is set on a schedule that's decided in advance. It varies by time of day, but in contrast to dynamic pricing, it itself is fixed in advance. Those projects feature higher minimum and average tolls because, again, their intent is to produce additional revenue. They generally feature tolling all hours of the day and fewer exemptions for different types of vehicles. In contrast, projects that are intended to manage congestion, improve system efficiency, will feature dynamic pricing. This is pricing that uses an algorithm that looks at real-time traffic conditions, updates that price in response to actual demand of the facility. Those projects also tend to feature a higher maximum toll but a lower average toll. They're also often paired with HOV or transit exemptions to maximize person throughput over vehicle throughput. And this pricing occurs primarily at peak times. There are some toll authorities that feature no tolling at really low demand times, like late at night or early in the morning. And going forward, you're going to be weighing both of these objectives. So as policy decisions come before you, just know that you'll be expected to sort of put your fingers on the scale. It's also a part, as you'll hear later, of existing state policy. And so your role is in part to ensure that whatever pricing projects the state may approve have clear, consistent, and coordinated objectives, and again, seek to do these things. Here's some examples of different pricing projects and their objectives. So more frequently with the pricing of existing lanes, this is done to improve management or transportation system efficiency, either single lane or multiple lanes. And on the other hand, for a widened or rebuilt bridge or reconstructed facility, those projects are tolled primarily to produce additional transportation funding. So I'll hand it back at this point to Travis, who will take you through federal laws and pilot programs that apply to tolling projects on the interstate highway system or any highway funded by federal aid highway dollars.
Yep. As you know, the Commission is required to apply to the Federal Highway Administration by the end of the year for authority to toll. And so this section will talk about how we're going to seek that authority. And you'll find that we need to seek that authority because of a provision of federal law. It's probably my favorite name of a section in U.S. code. It is literally called Freedom from Tolls. I believe this was written into some of the original Interstate Highway Act, but the key section is basically saying all highways constructed under the provisions of this title shall be free of tolls from all kinds. The title covers all the federal aid highway system, not just the interstate. Of course, the initial portion of this does say that there are exceptions in what is called Section 129 of the federal code. But this is the reason why in the United States, tolling has been the exception rather than the norm. Of course, a lot of people will say, well, the East Coast, they got all over the place. Most of those were put in place before this section of the code was enacted by the U.S. Congress. So they're essentially grandfathered in. But you can see then it means that without federal approval and without some limited exceptions, tolling is essentially prohibited on federal roads, federal aid roads, which includes everything from less than or greater than a local road. And essentially any arterial or collector is subject to this. There are exceptions, though, as I mentioned. In Section 129, there are a number of provisions that allow for tolling. One of the ones that has been used more frequently is converting a high-occupancy vehicle lane to a high-occupancy toll lane. Now, that's something that WashDOT has done in part up in the Puget Sound metro region, and it was something that we looked at in the value pricing process, and we just don't have a whole heck of a lot of HOV lanes in the Portland metro region, and those that we do have did not appear to be effective if you were to convert it. You can also, yes?
Quick question, Travis. If we were to talk about something like a shoulder, would that fall under new capacity or reconstruction?
Commissioner Simpson, that is a good question and one we will write down. And you will hear that response from me today a number of times. I'm not sure that anyone has actually told a shoulder without actually turning it into a new lane. So let's do a little bit of research on that for you. Good question, though. New roads can be tolled. That is actually where most toll roads that are new come from. Is Texas, for example, has built a lot of new highways and they toll them. We have looked at that on a couple of occasions and haven't found a good application in Oregon. For one, we don't build a lot of new roads. And in a lot of cases, you still have diversion challenges because who's going to drive on the new road and pay $3 when there's another alternative road available? The third area is reconstruction of roads. And I should note that there's a slightly different approach to bridges. Any bridge, even on the interstate, that you reconstruct can be tolled. And so this is likely the authority we would use on the Abernathy Bridge, where we're going to be widening that bridge, reconstructing it, seismically retrofitting it. It is allowable to toll that bridge under Section 129. The other area where you can toll is new capacity, but this is really tricky because on the interstate, you can only toll the new lane. And in fact, it's even more narrow than that. If you look at the attachment we provided you that has the language, what it essentially says is that you cannot, by tolling, reduce the number of net free through lanes. And that is very challenging, as you can imagine. Even something like our Rose Quarter project actually has no net new through lanes. It is only auxiliary lanes. And you cannot toll, just add an auxiliary lane and then toll the highway. So this is where the challenge comes in. New capacity is difficult to toll unless you are just tolling that one additional lane. There are, however, a couple of other pilot programs that Congress has approved over time. The first is the value pricing pilot program that was approved in 1991 to demonstrate to what extent pricing works to reduce congestion in various circumstances. Congress created 15 slots under this program, and Oregon has one. We got one to do our road usage charging work and to look at Highway 217. We recently applied for renewal of that slot, and so we have a slot in this program that is likely one of the programs that we will look to Federal Highway Administration to seek tolling authority. Because while I-205 is likely approvable under the existing exceptions, the I-5 segment that we're talking about doesn't fit as well. And even on I-205, we may look at tolling not just on the smack dab middle of the bridge in order to better manage diversion and congestion, or we might look at tolling earlier than completion of the project. So the where and the when, we may seek a fairly easy waiver under the value pricing pilot program to get around any restrictions that otherwise might apply.
So, So on the value pricing pilot program, I understand, can have multiple applications. Is there a limit to the number?
Commissioner Van Brocklin, I do not believe there is. We're working with FHWA to determine the best way forward to apply under these programs or under any federal authority. We had just a great discussion with FHWA last week. We've had multiple phone calls with their program staff back in Washington, D.C. We may submit 2 different applications, one for I-5, one for I-205. We might submit 1 application under this program. Or in the long run, we may submit multiple if this system-wide feasibility analysis provides multiple locations where you might undertake tolling. The second program that was created by Congress is the Interstate System Reconstruction and Rehabilitation Pilot Program, otherwise known as ISRRPP. This is a program that was established in 1998 and allows conversions of toll-free interstate highways into toll facilities for the purpose of reconstructing or rehabilitating corridors that could not otherwise be maintained adequately or improved without the collection of tolls. There are only 3 slots available nationwide, and I will tell you, no one has yet been able to find a way to make this program work to fund, to use tolling to fund interstate reconstruction and rehabilitation. There were 3 states that quickly jumped into these slots back when it was first created and then just sat there for 15 years. FHWA finally instituted a use it or lose it approach to those slots, and so they all lost it. And then FHWA opened it back up earlier this year. When that opened up, we took a real serious look because we wanted to find a way to try to use this program as the way to move forward on value pricing. But what FHWA told us is, you know, if you're looking at actually congestion management, this is not really the program for you. And when we looked at the program requirements, it just didn't fit. So we did not end up applying under it. That's not to say that we won't. But we have not to date, and again, no one across the country has been able to find a way to make this program actually work for using tolling to rehabilitate the interstate because of the strictures put on the use there. So, That's the basic federal situation in which we find ourselves. We're working very closely with FHWA to determine how we can move forward. They have been extremely helpful to date and have indicated that while the answer is not automatically going to be yes on any of these projects, that they are really interested in working with us to see if there is a pathway forward. There also, as you can imagine, is an Oregon policy framework that comes from our laws and our constitutions and the administrative rules that you have adopted. I'm going to start by talking you through the Oregon Constitution, Article 9, Section 3A, which I'm sure you all have memorized. But I will read this little piece of it to you regardless. We talked about this morning. But it says, revenue from any tax or excise levied on the ownership, operation, or use of motor vehicles shall be used exclusively for the construction, reconstruction, improvement, repair, maintenance, operation, and use of public highways, road streets, and roadside rest areas in this state. That is a really important section of the Oregon Constitution, because what it means is it is very clear toll revenue will be constitutionally restricted for highway purposes. I don't think that that's really anything that is in question. And as you talked about earlier, in your direction to the agency, that the money will be used on the transportation system, that is entirely consistent with this constitutional restriction. The question that we are now exploring and have asked our attorneys at the Oregon Department of Justice is, given that constitutional restriction, when this toll money goes into the state highway fund, or into, in this case, the congestion relief fund with this restriction on it, what are the opportunities to use that? We obviously know it can be used for roadway projects. We could use it to widen I-205. We could use it for roads. We know we can use it for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure inside the right-of-way, but not outside of the right-of-way. But what opportunities are there to use it for highway purposes that might facilitate better public transportation, for example, or might facilitate better bicycle and pedestrian transportation? We know we cannot pay for transit operations. We can't cut a check to TriMet from this money to operate more buses. But are there some ways that we could find projects that would benefit buses or public transportation, intersection improvements, shoulder running, whatever it might be, that would be eligible because it is a highway purpose? And so we are exploring that right now and hope to get some guidance from DOJ about how far that allows us to go.
For example, if there was a dedicated bus lane, does that mean only the bus can use that lane?
Commissioner Simpson, that's exactly what we're exploring right now. If there's a dedicated bus lane that only a bus can use, could we pay for it out of the highway fund, or out of the congestion relief fund in this case, given this restriction? That's a question, I think we asked that exact question to DOJ, and hope to get an answer that will help inform, as we go forward, this discussion about mitigation and investment in better transit service. So I will hand it back to Mr. Kassler now, who will walk you through the statutory and administrative rule framework, as well as the policies that the Commission has adopted.
Thanks, Travis. So as we mentioned before, even though ODOT does not currently operate any tolled facilities, it doesn't mean we're starting from scratch, and that's a good thing. Oregon Revised Statutes Chapter 383 establishes general statewide tollway provisions. It was first enrolled in 1995. There have been subsequent updates as other toll projects have been considered. The OTC tolling roles and responsibilities are contained in here specifically to designate and approve toll facilities and set toll rates. You are the toll authority. If you didn't know that before, you certainly do now. It establishes the state tollway account, and with House Bill 2017, the Congestion Relief Fund, separate pots of money where toll revenue would go into, and provides some restrictions around the use of those funds. It provides toll revenue bonding authority, sets rulemaking authority, requires interoperability with Washington, and not included here on the slide, it ensures privacy of toll customers' data, which is another important piece of this chapter. However, parts of this statute will need updating. For example, it generally presumes that the state will enter into agreements to toll with a public-private partnership because concession agreements were the common tolling arrangement when it was established. So one of the things that we will want to do is look at ways that we can update this chapter to make it work with the projects currently being considered. We also have, you as the commission, have utilized rulemaking provisions from that chapter to set up a number of key provisions in Oregon Administrative Rule Chapter 731, Division 40. Most importantly, this division outlines the process for initiating, evaluating, authorizing, and administering a toll project. Think of these rules as the foundational nuts and bolts for tolling. Similar to statute, though, these rules will need updating, including the process for reviewing and approving toll rates. Again, it generally assumes a P3 proposer. Specific rules for toll projects on interstate bridges that were put in place during the CRC conversations. We may need to make this language more general or makes separate rules specific to future projects. It reinforces interoperability provisions within statute and specifically mentions Washington, but what about California or other toll neighbors who may want to be interoperable with our state? And it sets civil penalties for failure to pay tolls, but we may need to look at other toll authorities and identify enforcement trends. More on that later.
Also include the ability for us to get penalties from another state? So how does that mix into it?
Chair Boehne, that's an excellent question. So within statute, there is limited enforcement reciprocity with Washington. So one of the enforcement provisions within ORS Chapter 383 is a registration hold on a vehicle that has failed to pay its tolls or associated fees or penalties. And that is something that DMV can act on both for outstanding tolls within the state of Oregon and if we receive that information from Washington. But it does not include other provisions and reciprocity provisions for enforcement outside of that. In addition to statute and rule, the OTC has adopted amendments to Oregon's statewide transportation plans related to tolling. We've identified 3 areas here, but there's actually quite a bit of work here. And the important thing to note here is that in general, these policies don't appear to require updating at this time. They seem consistent with the feasibility analysis and PAC process we've just been through, which is good. Updates to the OTP and OHP in 2012 stress the value of considering pricing strategies to manage congestion and finance capital projects. They also require toll projects to have clear, consistent, and coordinated objectives to ensure the public's trust. And as I mentioned before, that's one of your roles will be making sure that those projects have those objectives and meet them. And finally, OHP policy requires the state to implement all electronic toll systems, which are interoperable with neighboring jurisdictions, and that can also facilitate cash-only motorists. That's an important point here. It's probably the question I get asked the most by friends, relatives, members of the motoring public who are interested in what I do. It's important to note that there will not be toll booths or toll plazas. One thing, no change baskets. It's one of the, again, it's a good thing, especially for toll projects that aim to reduce congestion because toll plazas are an outdated technology antithetical to improving system efficiency. So here we get into some of the fun meat of this presentation.
Hey, quick question on that. So Washington State, their system is all electronic. So if you have a Washington plate, are you automatically registered in their system, or do you have to do something proactively?
That's a good question, Commissioner O'Halloran. WashDOT's system is somewhat unique from the toll authorities we've visited in that it does treat it treats all motorists who use their system as customers. What it doesn't do is automatically put you in their system, right? So you have to set up an account in order to take advantage of lower toll rates. But it doesn't start you off as a violator where some toll authorities do. So that's sort of it's an interesting policy position that they took. For folks who have not yet enrolled either a transponder or their license plate in a good to go account, then they will contact the appropriate DMV, find the address on file for the registered vehicle and send the toll bill there. But they will not immediately assess a fee, so they will not, or a violation. So they won't treat you as a violator.
So out of state, anyone who's driving with a non-Washington license plate would simply receive a bill in the mail.
Yeah, I went through the 405 express toll lane, for example, one time. I actually make a point to test that toll lane to figure out how the heck it works. And a few weeks after I went through it, got a bill in the mail. It has a number. I went on their website on my iPhone, typed in the number, paid my toll. It was an incredibly smooth process. You do get, as Russ mentioned, a small surcharge for paying by mail as opposed to having it automatically deducted from an account. But regardless, it's an incredibly smooth process.
And so if you look in the northeast corridor, they're still using, they do a lot of electronic tolling, like with Easy Pass, et cetera, where you set up an account, but they still allow for cash transactions, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then for, under what authority did Washington State have to receive an exemption for tolling under the existing authority? Because they obviously put it in since that.
So that's an excellent question, Commissioner O'Halloran, and it depends on the project they use, but generally speaking, no, they haven't had to utilize like the VPPP for theirs. They had a pretty extensive pre-existing HOV network that they took advantage of to convert into express lanes, and then for their for the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, that was a bridge reconstruction project. So they took advantage of the 129. The area where they did need to take advantage was for the SR 520 floating bridge. And there, because they were tolling a pre-existing bridge and they were implementing some time of day peak congestion pricing to it, I believe they used the VPPP for that particular project.
Yeah, that's correct, in the sense that the new SR 520 floating bridge was eligible for tolling under Section 129. They told the existing bridge in order to start a revenue stream to pay for the project. So much like we might seek authority to toll the Abernathy Bridge under value pricing, because if we want to toll before that project is under construction, you might use that authority.
Thank you.
So there are 4 key areas of tolling policy that we've identified here: toll rate setting, vehicle class considerations, equity and mitigation, and enforcement. And before I provide a high-level overview of those, it's worth mentioning at this point that we are doing research on best practices, reaching out to our neighbor jurisdictions for lessons learned, big ideas, future plans, and horror stories. We also want to make sure that whatever options Oregon eventually pursues takes into consideration advances in technology and changes in the transportation marketplace. As a new toll authority, Oregon will be in a unique position to break with convention if it so desires.
On that, so have we also, so as motor carriers, as trucks are paying weight distance, have we thought about, I mean, would we still apply congestion pricing to trucking, or have we, is that a question that needs to be answered?
That's a good question. Commissioner O'Halloran, as far as I know from observing the PAC process, there was some assumption within some modeling that we would price CMVs as well as light duty or passenger vehicles. But as far as a policy decision, that has not yet been made.
So I'm not saying that trucking doesn't contribute to congestion, but I'm saying if we're going to create freight corridors, and I think that we don't need to answer now, but I think it's something we need to look at, is if we're applying weight distance on trucks and they are truly the only ones that are kind of paying their true cost of wear and tear on the system. It's just a conversation we need to have down the road to say what is the right application here? Are they subject to this? Are they exempt from this? We just need to look at it and have a conversation about, is congestion and it applies to all, or because we feel they're carrying a weight, should it be different?
I think that's factored into the exemptions, and then also the discounts that we were talking about too, because I think it would be, there are many facets to that in terms of we want to make sure that there's equity, and that's also a piece of making sure that in terms of what we pay, and but that definitely from one of our partners, that's part of the exceptions piece.
Yeah, and Russ will, oh, good.
Yeah, as our, low income, obviously people that where it's a really disadvantaged impact or disproportionate impact. Thank you.
Yeah, and Russ will talk a little bit about that in the next slide, but in general, the principle of cost responsibility among different vehicle classes is enshrined in the Oregon Constitution in Article 9 as well. And regardless of whether you choose to include or exempt trucks in that, the contributions of light vehicles versus heavy vehicles, including tolls, would be factored into our highway cost allocation study. And so generally, the approach we've looked at when we did the I-5 Columbia River crossing, for example, we would have toll rates for individual cars and then higher toll rates for trucks to recognize that cost responsibility that they disproportionately impact the system, and they benefit significantly from that investment in congestion relief as well.
Excellent segue into that first area of consideration, setting toll rates. The first thing that's important to note here is that you will not need to make every aspect of these decisions. Much of the heavy lifting will be done in the planning and NEPA stages. Instead, the key takeaway for you as a rate-setting body is to identify the values and needs of the users and align those with the objectives and performance goals of the toll project. But to give you an idea of the considerations at play, here are some of the dimensions of toll rate setting. As I mentioned earlier, House Bill 2017 clearly sets up that for congestion pricing purposes, there should be some variation, some consideration of time of day and peak usage, right? Demand on the facility and pricing. But there are a number of ways to do that. Specifically, variable rates that are set on a toll schedule. And there are a number of toll authorities that utilize those so that drivers have additional information about the rate they'll be paying in advance of the trip they take. Or dynamic pricing, which again uses real-time data and actual demand of the facility to set a price. There are advantages and disadvantages to both approaches, but it's important to know that those are out there. For the tolling of heavy vehicles, some places use per axle counts to determine a toll rate. New technology is allowing toll authorities to consider volumetric rates, which is very fascinating, but I haven't yet seen a toll authority that's used volumetric rate to set a toll rate. Toll rate caps are another area of much discussion among toll authorities. Benefits to this is it gives drivers a certainty in the maximum toll that they will pay. The flip side is that it can limit the toll authority's ability to manage congestion if demand dictates that the price exceed whatever the predetermined cap was set at. Times of day are consideration with the hours of operation of the toll facility itself. Again, if demand drops off precipitously late at night or early in the morning, does it make sense to price? And then toll rate by payment method. Washington's a good example. Our neighbors to the north have a different rate by mail because of the additional processing charges, the postage and handling required to process toll payments by mail.
How often do rate-setting bodies revisit their rates? And because there are a lot of unknowns right now in terms of what we will be seeing and how rideshare and all these different technologies and different things coming online are going to impact our system. What does that look like?
That is an excellent question, Chair Boehne. We've seen it done differently in different places, as you might expect. Some toll authorities, their boards that set toll rates meet every year. Others meet and set like 5-year plans. And so it just would depend on, that is not articulated in statute or in rule currently. So one of the things that I think we get to decide as a new toll authority is how frequently those toll rates should be set.
One thing I would note is your neighbors to the north, the Washington State Transportation Commission, their primary function at some level as an organization is as the toll rate setting body for the state of Washington, both ferries and toll roads. And we anticipate that we will have joint sessions with them for you to learn about this. And especially if you're going to be talking about annual joint West Coast meetings, we may want a specific session in the not too distant future with them on just that topic, because they've learned a lot of lessons over time. WashDOT has been very clear. They've made a lot of mistakes. And so we will, as I've told many people, make sure that we don't make the same mistakes as WashDOT. We'll make different mistakes.
It's an excellent assurance.
I've got a comment and a question. The comment is the bill, as I read it, gives us a lot of flexibility in this area because it says that value pricing may, there's a lot of shalls in this. This is a may, not a shall. Value pricing may include, but is not limited to, variable time of day pricing. So we may look at variable pricing. We may look at other things, either in lieu of or in addition to. So I think that's, unless the Justice Department is taking a different view, I think that's the correct read. My question is, in the bill, there's a reference to value pricing setup project. What is value pricing setup project?
Oh, Commissioner Van Brocklin, it's a funny story, along with a lot of other funny stories.
Another funny tolling
HB
story.
27.
Excellent.
No,
we did one.
It's actually, okay, I set that up and now it's going to flop miserably because it's not actually that funny. There were a lot of little things in HB 2017 that were in early and then dropped out. I mean, as you know, there was at one point, it was an $8 billion program and then became a $5.3 billion program. That was initially a project that was a specific earmark that provided funding for ODOT to go do this work, the PAC process, and then actually deploying the on-road infrastructure that you see up in that picture. There was some amount of money, it was around $30 million that was originally earmarked. At some point, I think as the size came down, that came out as a specific earmark, and instead we have the authority to use either toll funds or the state highway fund or even federal highway funds in some cases to do that work. But in a sense, it's no longer accounted for directly in the revenue from HB 2017.
So it's the preliminary work that leads to actually implementing
Yep.
and posing.
Yeah, arguably everything
Tolling.
up to the day where you flip that system live and start collecting revenue,
Okay.
a lot of that cost would have been covered by that earmark.
Thank you.
Question back at the statement about Washington or WashDOT or Washington OTC or Washington Transportation Commission being the tolling authority. Did they get or do they get any pushback on the tolls on ferries versus, I mean, here you're paying for a piece of floating infrastructure, and yet there's a lot of pushback on using tolls to build physical infrastructure groundside.
Commissioner Callary, I know every time I try to take my car on a Washington State ferry, I curse the Washington State Transportation Commission and their ferry rates. That's a good question that we could ask them, but I think people recognize that oftentimes ferries are the only way to get to some of those isolated communities in the San Juans in particular, and yet they have to be very careful just because of that many people rely on those on a day-to-day basis. And so yeah, they certainly do get pushback. It is a major political football that I think they deal with on a regular basis.
The next area of policy consideration is around vehicle class exemptions or reduced rates. They are often implemented to incentivize certain user choices or achieve project outcomes, and there are a wide range of examples. Certainly, the more common examples we see are for high occupancy vehicles, for transit, emergency vehicles, even motorcycles or clean air vehicles. But with any of these options, policymakers will have to balance exemptions with other project objectives. Exemptions are often difficult to enforce and can lead to a slippery slope of unintended consequences. For any potential vehicle exemption or rate reduction, Oregon will need to consider factors like revenue gain or loss, impact on system performance, and the cost benefit of enforcement. Questions there?
So on that topic, so in taxation, we have in many states, federal government, a graduate income tax, and it's an ability to pay concept. Do you know of any states that are using essentially a graduated tolling concept to take into account? I'm thinking about this in the context of the equity comments that have been received throughout the process.
Sure.
Is there a successful system that maybe exempts out people of a certain income category? If you make below X, you're totally exempted, or you get a reduced rate or something like that. I know some people don't like graduated income tax. They prefer a flat tax or something else, but we in Oregon have a graduated income tax. So I'm just curious whether out there you're aware of any system that does kind of take this idea of ability to pay to some degree, or at least exempts out kind of the least able to afford additional costs.
Yeah, Commissioner Van Brocklen, I'm not aware of any state that has been able to put in place that sort of progressive income tax type concept of a progressive toll. Russ will talk about this in just a moment, actually, around equity and some of the things that are going on there. I will tell you that the research we've reviewed does show that there is, in a sense, tolls are somewhat progressive in the sense that higher income individuals pay a larger portion of their income in tolls. Most, particularly when you talk about congestion pricing with higher rates at peak hours, most lower income workers are not traveling by car on highways or freeways at peak hour. They're more likely to work or use public transportation. They're more likely to use local streets than the highway. They're not traveling as far sometimes. And also they are less likely to travel at peak hours because oftentimes they're in service industries. They don't have the traditional, 8 to 5 type jobs. Now that is in no way to downplay the impact this policy regime could have on lower income Oregonians and people from Southwest Washington. And Russ will talk about how we will look at mitigating some of those impacts.
And it may not even be the best idea. It's just something that I was thinking about. There may be many other better solutions to that issue.
It is an excellent segue into the next area of focus, which is around equity and mitigation. One of the policy areas where stakeholders have already identified several priorities through the PAC process is equity and mitigation. From their recommendation, we know that improved transportation options, including access to public transit services, is a key strategy. We also know that special provisions are needed for environmental justice populations, including low-income communities. Finally, we understand that diversion strategies should be incorporated to minimize and mitigate negative impacts to adjacent or affected communities. Here's what we've seen other places, to your question, Commissioner Van Brocklen. But we are going to school on our options to help recommend localized solutions that are best for the region and community any future toll projects serve. We have seen reduced toll rates or subsidies for individuals. I'm thinking specifically of a Virginia DOT program that waives certain fees and that allows for some toll refunds. Monthly account caps for people who reach a certain level of tolling within a month, though that, you'd have to balance against project goals around congestion management, because if they reach that cap, then the incentive to make other choices during peak times goes away. Transit-based earned toll credits, especially if a toll authority works in conjunction with the transit provider in that region. We went down and visited LA Metro. They, of course, are both a transit provider and an operator of express lanes. And so if people make a certain number of rides on their transit service, they earn toll credits back. Leveraging existing programs that already do means-based identification, like EBT programs, allowing for people to pay using those programs. That's what our neighbors to the north do. unbanked or underbanked folks, cash-based accounts like prepaid toll tags or cash handling payment services, and making sure that when you allow for those types of things, that they are not paying at a higher rate than somebody who has the ability to set up an account to pay without cash. And then low cost or free transponders, again, using some sort of means-based testing there.
Question. So those are all great, and I think we heard a lot of those kind of options in the PAC process. But are there things that our neighbors up north or south, because it seems like California has a very strong focus around equity pieces, are there anything that those areas are working on that they haven't implemented yet that we potentially could jump on sooner than later, that you've learned or anything like that?
That's an excellent question, Commissioner Simpson, and it's one of the questions we asked when we just recently came back from a peer exchange with 4 different toll authorities in California. And the short answer is no, at least not that they were willing to disclose to us. They do have, again, especially LA Metro has a broad number of programs. They also have an account fee waiver for folks who qualify. Because they charge, an annual servicing fee to the account. It's I want to say it's like $2 per transponder or something like that. But that is waived if you qualify. But we are very attentive to any trends in this particular area. And so as we continue to reach out to other jurisdictions, one of the things that we're going to be studying the most is innovations within equity and mitigation strategies and policies.
Just to give you a sense of this, I spoke in Portland at the International Bridge, Toll, and Tunnel Association conference. This is the toll industry conference a couple weeks ago about this. They wanted to learn about what we were doing since they were in Portland. And I spoke about equity for a few minutes, and a woman from Southern California stood up and said, "Hey, I love what you're doing around equity. I really want to learn from what you're doing." And I said, "Well, actually, most of what we've learned is from you." So it tells me that the state of practice around equity is not as advanced perhaps as it could be, and that we will need to learn from others, but that there isn't as much best practice perhaps as there could be.
And I bring that up, and sorry real quick, because I just want to make sure that this is out there, because as we were talking about over lunch about how bigger this conversation is. I mean, if you look at any development, it's, utility infrastructure, then transportation infrastructure, then your actual physical development. And even though we're interfacing with transit agencies and whatnot to try to figure out ways that are palatable, I do think there's a bigger conversation, and going forward, there's no way we can talk about equity in the transportation system without talking about that interlinkage between the development, the structural development, the housing, or whatever may be land use that comes as a result, because it's all one and the same.
Those are excellent points, Commissioner Simpson, and it is hard to come up with specific solutions until the NEPA process, where we'll learn a lot more and we'll take into consideration a lot of those things you just mentioned, impacts to neighborhoods, to schools, impacts to the environment, origin and destination studies, TNR studies that go into that process will tell us a lot. And we'll likely pursue different solutions on the I-5 portion and the I-205 portion, especially around diversion and mitigation. Yeah.
Just one additional comment. I agree with Commissioner Simpson on land development and transportation planning around development. A couple of those examples you gave, that was a very interesting list. It would be the kind of list that I hope gets onto Ryan's list, the list we were building earlier. But that a couple of those were related to transit, and the more we talk about this, the more I think it raises the importance of increased coordination and communication and idea generation between TriMet and ODOT in particular, particularly if we're going to try and maximize the use of the asset and ensure that we're getting maybe getting maximum volume of people with less vehicles, that's the kinds of things you're talking about involve a lot of cooperation between transit and the transportation department. So I know ODOT cooperates with TriMet on a lot of things, but this whole tolling effort will I think, create a whole new opportunity for that intergovernmental cooperation that's going to be essential to get this right in the region.
Excellent points, Commissioner Van Broeklen. And one of the things, I won't veer too much into technology in this conversation, but one of the things we're looking into is the possibility of leveraging an existing system like Hop Fast Pass as a method for paying for both transit and tolls. And if you do that, you can unlock a lot of coordination between those two programs and the ability to, again, incentivize user choices between modes that isn't as possible without utilizing the same platform for payment.
And just one more quick thing on that. I just think of our law firm as an example. We pay for every single person in our firm in our various locations, including Portland, which is where our biggest office is, to all of them we pay for a universal TriMet pass. I don't know how that relates to tolling, but maybe it does. No idea. But if you've got lots of businesses out there, which I think you do in the Portland region, paying for that, and there's a way to, I don't know how it would relate, but it's something that's going on that potentially we could connect into, if nothing else, as a way to communicate to people about what's happening on tolling and encouraging people to think about rideshare, and if they're not on this transit system, they might still have a pass, because almost everyone takes a pass, but not everyone uses the pass, that it might encourage them to just think about other modes of just, take a friend, figure out a carpool in your neighborhood, whatever it is. Every one of those that we get is a step in the right direction.
Great considerations. And it takes us to our final area of policy consideration, and that's enforcement. Again, we've seen enforcement approached several different ways in other places. We'll continue to do our research to identify best practices. As with equity and mitigation strategies, we understand that what's done elsewhere might not be best for Oregon or Oregonians. But we have seen commonly in place civil penalty structure and some type of penalty or fee forgiveness program corresponding with that, because the intent is to collect the toll. It's not to penalize people, especially if you can do that in a way that steers people towards setting up an account so that they don't get into the possibility of accruing future penalties or fees. I think that's really important. Registration holds through the DMV, making sure that for folks who may not even know that they had a toll, right? Let's say they have outdated information and the toll bill that they got gets lost in the mail. When they go in to renew their registration at the DMV, there's going to be a reminder that they owe out an outstanding toll, and they're required to pay that before they can renew their vehicle. We may, depending on decisions around vehicle class considerations, require occupancy or toll evasion violation statutes within Oregon Vehicle Code. We have, as I mentioned before, a little bit of enforcement reciprocity set up in statute, but we may want to look to expand that to other forms of enforcement or other neighboring jurisdictions. And some toll authorities also use as a criminal action a theft of services if people accrue really high outstanding amounts of tolls, who are sort of the serial evaders. Those are all enforcement options.
We take into account, we have a fair amount within our communities that have maybe track phones, don't have bank accounts. And I think that goes into this options piece too. I would really want us to mine down into the data of what our population looks like in terms of transit options and using private vehicles. We know that if we can get them on transit, there's a cost savings of that vehicle overhead. But for many, we just don't have the choice options that would be able to meet their needs and have confidence in the system. How do we deal with those sorts of things?
It's a really good question. Travis, do you want to take a stab at that one?
So if you're talking primarily about the unbanked and other types of populations that may not have the capability to set up a account, link a card or something else, that is something all across the country that folks work on. I mean, there are some cases, I believe you can buy, for example, in some states you have a small transponder tag that goes into your windshield, and you could buy a prepaid pass, essentially, with a small amount of money.
Right.
That would then not have you penalized or have to pay the higher rates of paying by mail or other things. So absolutely, it's something we're going to look at as part of this whole process. It came out in the PAC discussion around equity that we needed to work through those questions about the unbanked and those of limited means who may not have a credit card or other ways to pay that or set up that sort of account.
And to reiterate, today's conversation was intended to be a relatively high-level first step in what will be a larger discussion around tolling policy. As part of a more comprehensive policy development and design process, we know that next steps include ODOT and the OTC in cooperation with regional stakeholders and partner agencies articulating preferred pricing policies for the system in the areas we described today. Internally, we are standing up a strategic tolling policy working group and reaching out to neighboring toll authorities to help identify the critical path for decision-making, when policies need to be made both in relation to each other and in relation to major project milestones. Once we have developed that timeline, we will come back to the OTC to do a deeper dive on these policy areas so that you will be prepared to engage with affected partners and stakeholders to coalesce around a wide array of policy preferences. And with that, I open it up to final questions.
Will you be visiting us in Silverton at the workshop at all, or how is?
Commissioner Simpson, no, the plan right at the moment is to step back a little bit from this topic, let the development of the application go forward over the next several months, and then in November, we will be back with the actual application to the Federal Highway Administration, as well as, I believe, the draft scope of the system-wide feasibility analysis, and there are some other topics we're going to queue up. For example, we need to understand what the public thinks about this and how we can talk to them effectively. We've done some research on that topic, and I think we might want to bring in some of that to you and then start some of these policy processes. We're going to go a little bit quiet right now because we really want to focus on developing that application and getting that right and bringing it back to you. So you'll hear from us again starting in November, and then I would expect you'll be seeing a lot of Russ and Ryan and Judith and a lot of other people darkening your doorsteps to talk about this topic.
Great. Well, Russ, as program manager, I would highly encourage you to just think outside the box, be obviously as creative as you can, and we can be a sounding board for you. But obviously, I'm adamant about making sure that we are a leader in the 21st century as it relates to some of these programs and a multimodal system.
Thank you, Commissioner Simpson. I appreciate that charge and that trust.
And I would also hope that we have an opportunity to learn from the tolling authorities that you visited. So I'll look forward to that report too on what it is that lessons learned or things that we don't want to replicate.
Absolutely.
So, great. Any other comments or questions? Great job. Okay, thank you. All right, next we have a public hearing, and I have a statement to read very quickly. The Oregon Transportation Commission will now conduct a public hearing on the statewide transportation strategy adoption. Public comments will be limited to no more than 3 minutes each. Individuals providing similar testimony on the same topic are requested to appoint a spokesperson. And the commission has allocated 30 minutes for this public hearing, but we'll hear all those who wish to testify. At first, we'll start with the staff report. Ms. Bohard, great to see you.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Jerry Bohard. I'm the Transportation Development Division Administrator. I did see, at least on the sign-up sheet, there was nobody there. So I would just like to, though, give you a little bit of a history, and what I'm looking for this afternoon would be approval of an amendment to the Oregon Transportation Plan relative to the statewide transportation strategy. But I would say this really began back in 2009 with the Jobs Transportation Act, which established the need for MPOs, especially Metro, to look at ways to reduce GHG emissions, but associated with light vehicles. And they also, in that bill, asked other state agencies besides ODOT to provide technical information. So this included from DEQ, from ODO, around estimating GHG emissions down to the 1990 levels for each of our MPOs. And your sister commission, LCDC, needed to adopt rules establishing the process for Metro to use in selecting this alternative. It also indicated that ODOT was to provide technical and financial assistance to Metro. I bring this up because I think you'll see a theme that it isn't just our agency and you as a commission that's involved in this conversation, but really other state agencies that are part of what we need to do to reduce emissions around transportation. Senate Bill 1059, which happened in the February session right at the end of this, was where the requirement for the STS came from. And I think, quite honestly, really came from a lot of conversations we were having at the staff level, that it was great that each of the MPOs needed to look at how to reduce GHG emissions from light vehicles, but we really needed that umbrella document about what does it mean for transportation, whether you're talking about freight, whether you're talking about aviation, so sort of all of the modes as we think about transportation. It also was clear in there that LCDC had to adopt rules on targets relative to all of the MPOs. So again, you can start to see the connection that happens there. So we started working on the STS. It was really headed up by Chair Ackerman at the time, and then Ken Williamson, who was the chair of the EQC from DEQ, ended up finishing up that work. Just a reminder, is a 50-year vision, list of strategies, potential actions, so very different from a modal plan. And I think you heard a lot of what it did in the April meeting when we talked about the monitoring report. I do recognize at the time when Chair Egan from the commission, there was concerns about sort of the economic implications of this, as well as I think the regulatory implications to our local governments. So that was the choice then to accept it at the time. But they did ask staff to go ahead and do an implementation plan. So we actually had an implementation plan, which we brought in front of the commission a few months later, talking about some of the programs, electric vehicles, eco-driving, the road user charge program, strategic investments, assessments, scenario planning, the work that really happens under Galen McGill's shop with ITS, so sort of the variable speeds, traffic incidents, planning and project selection. So we continue to do that work, and even in the planning and project selection, the recommendation that within 5 years that we adopt the STS as really within the Oregon Transportation Plan. So you're sort of fulfilling one of those implementation efforts. You heard, again, the monitoring report back in April. I think Amanda Peets really presented that. She presented the status of each of those. We actually reattached that to this memo. And I think the clear message was that we've been working on implementation of the STS, in some places being more successful than others, just depending on our abilities. We've also continued within each of our modal plans to really think about what we can do to reduce transportation emissions. So we certainly, being the first state DOT to do a transportation options plan and really think about how we can look at travel demand, what are some of the options there, I think was key. The work that we did within the bicycle and pedestrian plan. And then I think most recently, again, it'll happen hopefully next month, the public transportation plan. We actually have a strategy in there that talks about advancing the work of the MPOs to evaluate the expansion of public transportation to levels set forth in this statewide strategy. So again, you start to see the connections to each of the modal plans. I will also say that changing language in the Oregon Transportation Plan is something that you have done in the past. I think you heard Russ actually talk about that. Just with the tolling. So we actually had language in the OTP back in 2006 that we reframed based on what came out of all the tolling work that we did in those 9 papers a number of years ago. And that's what we're really recommending here. So the current language that we have in the OTP talks about encourage the development and use of technologies that reduce GHG emissions. So that was the language that we had in 2006 because we didn't know exactly what we needed to do. Now we have the STS, and so the recommendation of the new language is to reduce transportation-related GHG emissions, pursue strategies identified in the Oregon statewide transportation strategy, a 2050 vision for GHG reduction incorporated herein by reference. So it really gives us sort of that roadmap about things that we need to be considering to reduce GHG emissions. Last comment would note that you have letters of support with regards to that from our sister agencies. The directors there provided us support. I think you have one from Metro as well, with an addition about what they've been doing around climate smart, and then also I think from the environmental community. So with that, just a reminder, what I'm looking for is approval of an amendment to the Oregon Transportation Plan. So thank you.
Yes, and I again would like to call out Director Garrett and thank you for spearheading a discussion between agency department directors as well as commission chairs. I thought that was a wise decision to bring us together to talk about how we work on emissions. Obviously, land use, environmental policy, energy policy all factor into our ability for success. And making sure that we're not doing that in silos, but doing that work together collectively, which I know is happening through the implementation plan as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for your report. Any comments or questions before we get into public testimony? Okay, so please, if you'd like to, and if anyone else would like to sign up, I don't have a sheet, so the protocol would be please join us, hit the speak button, state your name for the record, and please let us know your testimony. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. My name is Jim Merritt. I'm the city manager for the city of Nissa. First of all, I don't disagree with anything that's gone on today. Just so you know, I think there's a lot of good ideas that came through the room today. I do have. Well, I'll start. With Representative Smith knew I was coming to this meeting today and contacted me earlier about this, but as well as Representative and myself, I have deep concerns about HB 2017, which has been brought up quite a bit today, about how the money is being spent. It seems to me that even through today, that a lot of those monies are being spent in the Portland metro area, and not a lot is coming to Eastern Oregon, and it concerns me as a rural community. And I'm not asking for an answer or anything today. I want the commission to at least think about that as a statement and be a little mindful of that there is another side to the state, and that we do require some of these funds as well as the western side of the state. Again, I don't disagree with anything that's going on, but there's only so much money in the pot, and we all need to share it a little more equally, I think, than what's happened in the past.
I think that in House Bill 2017, there was a recognition of smaller cities. There's a small city allotment. The counties also got together talking about ways that we can move smaller counties up in terms of minimum grant, moving from just the equity, the formula just wasn't quite going to make those commitments come true. And so as we go forward with increases in the gas tax and reporting back, there's a strong connection between what we do at the state and then what you do on the ground too. So I would encourage an offline conversation about needs that you might have and through your area commission on transportation as well. And the whole premise of House Bill 2017 is for us to be able to bring the state together up in terms of preservation and maintenance of the system, being able to have transit options and some public transportation issues addressed within even smaller communities. Also looking at ways in which the congestion in the metropolitan area is prohibiting some of your goods and such getting from your communities to different parts of the state, so and out of the state primarily. So would love to have a conversation offline and talk with you about some of the needs that you have, and because the hope is that there's something in there to be able to bring your communities and meet those needs. As we've mentioned, $5.3 billion, it sounds like a tremendous amount of funding for the backlog of need that we have in the state as a whole. We are sorely behind in being able to address those needs, but the hope is that we can go forward together.
I would agree with that statement wholeheartedly. I know that within my own community, we don't have much on transportation as far as public transportation, and it's very well needed. And so, again, I just hope that those monies can be distributed a little more evenly than they have been, as well as our road and infrastructures are sorely in trouble. So, anyway, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you listening to me.
More importantly, thank you for making time to address us today. Good to see you. Would anyone else like to address the commission on this particular item? Seeing the crowd go wild behind you, Jerry. Okay, so before I close the public hearing, anything else we'd like to put on the record for this? Okay, so I will go ahead and close the public hearing on the statewide transportation strategy. And I would, if we don't have any other questions or comments, I would welcome a motion.
Madam Chair, I would move that we adopt a statewide transportation strategy to amend it to include the greenhouse gas emission reduction plan into statewide policy as described. Is that adequate?
Meets our needs. Jerry, do you?
I think so, just to clarify that this is an amendment to the Oregon Transportation Plan.
An amendment to the Oregon Transportation Plan. Is that
Yes.
That's
adequate?
perfect.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, next we have a discussion with Region Solutions, with the Regional Solutions team. So Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Members of the commission, I want to thank you for inviting the Eastern Oregon RST to join us today and talk about some of the ongoing projects we have in Eastern Oregon. And what we've tried to do today is put a focus on transportation issues, obviously, for the OTC. So with that, I'd like to introduce Courtney Warner-Crowell. She's our coordinator for the Eastern Oregon RST.
Chair Boehne and commissioners. Like Ken said, my name is Courtney Warner-Crowell. I'm the Regional Solutions Coordinator for Eastern Oregon. So we cover, this team here, for the most part, covers 10 counties in Eastern Oregon. We are comprised of sort of two different regions, one which is called Greater Eastern Oregon, which has 7 counties, and then Northeast Oregon, which includes 3, Baker, Union, Wallowa. So I thought we'd do sort of a little bit of an introduction, and then we want to actually turn it over to the city manager of John Day here, Nick Green. We have a number of regional solutions projects here in the city of John Day, and we felt like Nick could do a great job of sort of explaining the vision behind that work. So I'll let Scott introduce himself.
Oh, good to see everyone again. Good afternoon. My name is Scott Fairley. I'm the Southeast Oregon Regional Development Officer for Business Oregon.
Excuse me. I'm Phil Stenbeck, the new Eastern Oregon DLCD representative.
And I'm Brian McDowell for Northeast Oregon, Baker Union, Wallowa Counties, Regional Development Officer for Business Oregon.
And Nick Green, John Day City Manager.
Want to talk about your restaurants closing at 9 o'clock after the meeting. But outside of that, it's great to see you all.
That is a fair topic of conversation.
Okay.
I'll just jump in and thank you again for traveling to John Day. We've got a lot of exciting projects in the works. This is really just designed to whet your appetite. So if you'll go to the next slide, I can show you what we're calling the John... I'm not driving yet. Okay. What we're calling the John Day Innovation Gateway. Over the last 18 months, the city has led the acquisition of almost 90 acres of brownfield and undeveloped riverfront and highway frontage property within the city. A large majority of this property were former mill sites that have been closed for several decades, as well as undeveloped property that was owned by the city and was used for our wastewater treatment plant. So what we are proposing to do in conjunction with Regional Solutions and other state agencies is to reorient the community around the John Day River, which has never been a central feature of our land use planning. It's been largely blocked by private property or public facilities that have been restricted access. So we're going to reorient the community to make the riverfront an asset and reconfigure our wastewater treatment plant so that we can really green up this area. We've got about a half mile of highway frontage, and we're calling this the Innovation Gateway both because it's the western gateway to the city, and also what we hope will be a gateway to our future. The driver for the acquisition was the need for a new treatment plant. Ours was built, the current plant takes up about 30 acres of the river. What you're looking at on the screen is a wastewater treatment facility designed by Sustainable Water out of Glen Allen, Virginia. That is the entire treatment process for Emory University in Atlanta, and it's the prototype that we're using to create our water hub facility. And this is a project we're doing in conjunction with both Sustainable Water and Anderson Perry.
Quick question, that's
Sure.
gray water, correct?
That is actually what they call purple pipe. So it's reclaimed water, Class A reclaimed water that's generated as a result of the gray water that comes in.
Got it.
Yep. That facility that you're looking at treats the same volume of wastewater that the city produces annually. So we're going to go from a 30-acre footprint along the river down to about a quarter of an acre. What's driving this investment is really our need to diversify our economy and make it more resilient. So the slide you're looking at there is what I call our flex capacitor. Hit my head one night, and this is what I saw, if you remember Back to the Future. This is our model for a sustainable community using assets that are already here. So locally harvested woody biomass converted to torrefied wood products, along with our hydroelectric power, will fuel the new facility, which will generate about 80 million gallons of reclaimed water annually. It almost doubles our water supply. That water, in turn, we plan to convert into use for cash crops and produce in hydroponics facilities. Multi-acre greenhouses that can meet our local need for fresh produce as well as create regional products for export. So these are assets that already exist but are not configured in this way. So what we look at as innovation is taking things that are already here, rearranging them in new ways that create greater economic value. Because we own 90 acres of riverfront, we also plan to green up the whole area. So this will be the driver. This is a picture of what our proposed facility will look like. It's part greenhouse, part wastewater treatment plant that'll produce the water. These are examples of the nutrient channels that are used to grow the crops indoors. And because this is 100% renewal, we're also going to harvest the biosolids for composting and reapply those to the land. So what before were liabilities that we had to manage because the wastewater was indirectly injecting into the river, we're now going to land apply and use in these new industries. And it'll be our version of a riverfront that meets the local culture and values. So it'll be commerce, recreation, amenities for the community, as well as something that integrates advanced technology and opportunities for higher education and research. This is really just eye candy, but it gives you a kind of an image of what we're going for. So public spaces where the community can meet and gather and socialize with each other, all driven by this new asset that we've never had before, marketable Class A water. Opportunities for farmers market to convert some of those existing planer sheds and other assets into community spaces and gardens. And this is a zoomed in picture of that 90 acres, what it may look like when it's completed. So we've enjoyed a lot of support from Business Oregon and the Regional Solutions team. Over the last 18 months or so, we've successfully raised over $3 million toward this and other city projects, primarily grants through DLCD and ODOT. The master planning for this area will be through a TGM grant, which the city received in 2017. DKS is the prime. Walker Macy will be the landscape architect. And so they'll design the area plan, working with Interflu for the riverfront restoration and JLA. Anderson Perry's our lead engineer on the treatment plant. And we've had wonderful support from state agencies. It looks like alphabet soup. I mean, we're touching everybody, OPRD, Water Resources, and we're just now beginning to branch out into the federal domain. And we also have a budding partnership with Oregon State. So a lot of excitement around this project and the opportunities. Euromex is going to be our partner on the greenhouses. They're a company out of Spain and Mexico, so this will be foreign direct investment in John Day with the opportunity to export to regional markets and potentially globally once we reach our full-scale model. The transload facility in Nissa will be a great opportunity for us as well to leverage some investments the state's already made in that area to enhance our economy. D.R. Johnson, Valerie Johnson with the D.R. Johnson Lumber Company sold the 53 acres of millfront to us for less than $10,000 an acre, which was really exciting. So I just felt a tremendous outpouring of support, a lot of heavy lifting still to do. But this is hopefully going to be an exciting new day for John Day.
I'm intrigued and excited. Your population is a little over 1,700, and sometimes it's easy to turn a ship that size, and sometimes it is really difficult to turn a ship that size. And so, and I suspect, you know, your population that's in the unincorporated area too. Would you mind just a flyover in terms of your community visioning process and how you got to this place?
It's been extensive. You know, as we canvassed the community and reached out to different groups, there was definitely a strong desire to see that mill corner improved. Right now, it's a symbol of what was, and sort of the loss of hope as industry collapsed around us due to federal regulations and other impacts to the timber industry. So, definitely a strong desire to see the land improved, and then really just the momentum that we've been able to get through public hearings and meetings, engaging the various groups throughout the community. There's been a lot of support, and we're fortunate to have a really good and unified city council that's helping to propel this vision. So that's just to whet your appetite. We'll have more to discuss in the coming months and years as we move this forward. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Ken Patterson, Area Manager for ODOT. And so the projects I wanted to talk about today that I've been working on through the RST are going to be updates of some projects you've seen in the past. The first and foremost is the reload facility at NISA that Nick alluded to. That's a big economic driver for Malheur County, and it's a big project for us out here in Eastern Oregon. And of course, we know that's a trigger project, you know, for House Bill 2017. We have been meeting, through the RST and then individually through some regional staff at ODOT, just keeping tabs on the progress of the project, getting updates on that, and then coordinating some of the transportation issues, that will be associated with the new facility in NISA. Just kind of as a recap, this is a $26 million project designed to create a reload facility to take produce, commodities, get them from truck, get them onto rail, and access markets east. The Malheur Economic Development Corporation, they're kind of basing this on some of the research they've done on other facilities around the nation, including Hunts Point, New York, which is kind of the primary produce receiving area around New York City. And based on that, they have developed a layout for the facility using the $1.3 million they've already received, from the OTC and ODOT to start the final proposal on this. And they're making, really good progress to meeting their September, 2018 report deadline to report back on, the economic factors, the demand, the use of the facility. And as a result of that, they've been developing interest from a number of different commodity groups. Start off with onions, and there's compressed hay. They've had some discussions with beef, and even some other commodities that are looking to locate in there. So it's starting to gain some traction with other commodities that will consider use of this. The site that they selected has been locked up. They have options, for the purchase of the land, so that when everything's finally approved, they can execute those. So from a project readiness standpoint, their land use or their land acquisition is going to be really firm. We met with Greg Smith, who's the executive director of Malheur County Economic Development last week, and started talking transportation issues. They've been working the rail and the commodity side of the business, but now they're working with us on the connections to county roads and state highways. So they've come to us with really good ideas of how to connect. They've listened to our input around ways we can make it safe out there, and the plan is coming together accordingly with that. What that did lead to is some further on grant type work, looking at maybe the next cycle of build grants to start looking at addressing some capacity issues. I think right now they're in good shape, with the existing roads that are out there, but as this builds out and as they intend it to build out, there's going to be more volume out there, and they're looking forward to that and trying to plan in accordance, to be able to accommodate that. From the RST standpoint, things have worked really well. They've picked a good site, so we've been working the transportation issues. They've been working through the land use issues. And it looks like they're well on track for being able to meet the deadline of making a formal proposal at that site. There's been a lot of local interest in it. People are excited about it. They've started partnering with other business parks or ports to be able to maybe build unit trains together, so that they can drop shipping costs, for the region. So that's been pretty exciting.
Questions on that?
Ken, is this inspired by the similar operation up in Tri-Cities, Washington, where?
Yeah, that's a good question, Commissioner Callery. I think this is directly related to that. I think the genesis of this project was a number of the shippers, from Malheur County found that they were shipping product up to Wallula to the RailX facility and then watching their same product come back through Ontario. And so that, adds shipping costs to what they're wanting to do, and they're wanting to be a little more efficient, and saw that there was enough demand for that it caused them to do that exploration step and do the market research to see if such a facility could be successful in the Treasure Valley.
Thank you. It's a good model to work from, because they were successful for a long time.
Yeah, it's been real successful, and Union Pacific's been a big partner in this, and Union Pacific had ultimately bought out RailX up there, and so they've adopted that model here.
Union Pacific likes unit trains.
The second project that I've got is the Genturo Road. This will just be a quick update because we're actually getting ready to go to bid in November of this year. As you recall, this was a project that cobbled together a lot of different funding from multiple sources, and I think it's a good example of what can happen through a regional solutions team. So this is a $6.7 million project to reconstruct a road to a diatomaceous mine near Druzy. And this is a key route from the mine at Druzy to the processing plant in Vail. We have about $2 million of flat money, federal land access program. We have $1 million of IOF that came from the OTC. We have $2 million of legislative funds that were bonded. There's $490,000 of enhanced dollars in this. And then the counties combined to put in $250,000 of funds to support the project. EP Minerals, the business partner, has put in $250,000. Business Oregon has put in $315,000 of IFA money, and they've also put in $415,000 of strategic investment funds. This is going to build about a 7.5 mile road. The idea is it'll be constructed in one construction season, and that will allow EP Minerals to increase production and bring on additional staff. So based on the application, they're going to create 23 FTE out of this project. We met with them, I think Scott and I met with them about a week and a half ago. We're in the process of getting all the funds collected up for the project and being able to award the project or have those funds available for the award of the project. The design is wrapping up and it's getting close, and people are pretty excited about that. I think this was a good project from the partnership standpoint, where a lot of different entities are all coming together to make something happen that couldn't happen individually. So good progress report on that. We're looking forward to constructing it next summer.
It's one of those projects where if you just don't give up, just keep going, it'll happen. So I'm grateful to see the patience.
Again, my name is Courtney Warner-Kroll. I'm the Regional Solutions Coordinator within the Governor's Office for Eastern Oregon. And I'm going to talk about a couple projects, both related to biomass here in Grant County. So our team here has been working for a number of years on kind of a couple projects related to biomass efforts here in Grant County. And those are both kind of related to how we can help ensure that the 10-year stewardship agreement on the Malheur National Forest continues to be successful. So a little bit of background on that stewardship agreement. That stewardship contract on the Malheur National Forest was started in 2013, and it has really helped keep Malheur Lumber Company here in John Day up and running. But the reality is that many of those logs coming off that that forest are small value, kind of low diameter, or small diameter, low value timber. So obviously many folks around the state have been trying to kind of figure out the silver bullet around how we can use that low value timber. And we have a couple projects that we've sort of invested in and worked through the past few years related to that. So the first is after the 2015 legislative session, the Regional Solutions Advisory Committee recommended giving over $800,000 in regional infrastructure funding, which is kind of the regional solutions money, for Iron Triangle Logging here in John Day to purchase a biomass breakdown facility and add some new equipment to start both stacking and storing and a firewood production line. So in addition to that, in addition to sort of that investment here in John Day, it allowed Iron Triangle to store over 800 truckloads of biomass in Seneca, down south, to be used for post and pole production. So the facility here in John Day is up and running. It's actually adjacent to the Innovation Gateway that you kind of heard about from Nick, and it's created 10 jobs here in the local economy. And sort of additionally and sort of connected is a project you guys actually heard about last year when we met with you, which was the Oregon Torrefaction Project. And this project has made some huge strides in the last year. And kind of a reminder is the Oregon Torrefaction Project is it's a collaboration between the U.S. Endowment with Forestry and Communities and Bonneville Environmental Foundation and Ochiko Lumber. So those are kind of the three partners. And the kind of goal of the project is to have a torrefaction facility that is co-located here in John Day with Malheur Lumber Company. And they're partnering with both the Forest Service and local stewardship and logging companies to basically source the majority of the biomass from forest health restoration treatments. And once up and running, they're designed to produce up to 100,000 tons per year of this torrefied fuel. And it'll comprise a belt dryer, a rotary kiln, torrefaction reactor, a densification system, and a shared thermal steam plant with Malheur Lumber. So it's sort of a co-location of both facilities. The idea is that the product will be sold in bulk to utility customers. And so while they really hope to work with domestic utilities, including PGE, which you might remember, they have done a lot of work related to testing this product, they anticipate the first markets will emerge in Asia. So sort of the plan is that the biomass will be trucked here to John Day, torrefied, and then put on trucks to Prineville, which will then be put on rail to go up to Longview, which will then be shipped out to Asian markets. So that's the transportation, the long transportation process. So in addition to the funding that has been given by sort of the partners, primarily the U.S. Endowment on Forestry and Communities, the Governor and Business Oregon did give a $200,000 forgivable loan from the Strategic Reserve Fund to help install a more efficient boiler that will be utilized both by the Torrefaction Project and Malheur Lumber, so it's kind of a double bang for the buck. Also, it'll help create and retain 13 jobs, and it kind of helps create a pipeline with local workforce providers to build a manufacturing kind of workforce pipeline here in John Day. So basically right now the plan is, actually I think this week, the biomass is starting to be trucked into John Day, and it's going to be stored actually at the Iron Triangle breakdown facility, and they hope to start production or start sort of construction of the facility at Malheur Lumber later this year after they have all their DEQ permitting. And then we'll start to see how things go with this project. So again, it's kind of two different projects, but they're working together related to kind of biomass in the region.
Courtney, you said that it can produce up to 1,000 tons of torrefied?
100,000.
100,000, sorry. What's the capacity set at? Is that it, or is that just the initial phase up?
I believe that's the initial phase up.
Okay, and then there hasn't been a determining capacity of what it could scale into?
No, they're kind of looking at this as a pilot project, and they hope to, if this all goes well and they start to get a ton of customers and a ton of market, they're sort of looking at what they're doing here as a possibility for future pilot projects around the West.
Great, and then you're referring to Longview, Washington?
Yes.
Okay, so which means that the truckers would have to actually get through the Portland metro area congestion, right?
It'll be on train.
Oh, rail
So
at
it'll
that
be,
point.
yeah,
All right,
it'll rail
got
it.
you. Different
But yes.
conversation then. All right.
Question. Have you computed the additional truck traffic on Highway 26?
You know, I don't know specifically if they have. I know they have been looking at that, but I think that's also one thing they'll be looking at. I'm not entirely sure.
Thank you.
I would encourage that it is.
Yes.
From a safety
Yes.
factor and just a
Exactly.
variety of other. Okay.
Good afternoon, Director, Commissioners. So, have a pretty exciting, interesting, colorful project that's upcoming here through the Wallowa Lake Dam Rehabilitation Project. You probably won't hear about it again, though, until maybe the first or second quarter of next year. Just if you're wondering where it's at, the dam is located just south of the city of Joseph up in Wallowa County. And in terms of the dam itself, the first kind of attempt was around building some wood bridge type stuff across the outlet in 1884. So that was kind of the first attempt. First concrete effort was in 1916. And then in 1970, it was declared a public safety hazard. And then in 1996, it was listed as a high hazard structure. And what that means is not so much the actual structure's condition, but if the dam was to fail, the impact to the community. And a rating of high means that there's a high likelihood of loss of human life as well as damage to property. So kind of significant that it's been rated that since 1996. So a couple current areas that they support, they irrigate roughly 15,000 acres of local ranch and agricultural land. They store and feed about 52,000 acres in the area, but the lake itself can go up to about 240,000 if it was able to fully utilize its capacity. It supplies some water to the city of Joseph, and it informally acts as a water control district to the city of Joseph, Enterprise, and Wallowa. So we're kind of working with them on that as well to determine if they should formally recognize that and switch to being a control district versus just an irrigation district. But and then there's a lot of recreational users that are impacted as well. So the two historical obstacles to getting this rehabilitation off the ground have been the significant cost to both the preliminary engineering, design, and construction, and then agreement of what type of fish passage, especially working with the tribe, Nez Perce. It's been a pretty challenging effort up till now to get an agreement on that. An estimate from the management company that's doing it or managing the dam is due to the deteriorated condition in the state, the water department has only allowed them to operate at about 70 to 72% to try and mitigate that high risk. So they have a lot more capacity that they just can't access because it's too risky. And the results that they're targeting, if they're successful with this project, are going to be including another 12,000 service acres potentially, increasing the utilization to get much closer to 100% capacity, and then obviously removing the high risk situation there. So the recent progress is they've completed their induction map. They're near completing the emergency action plan update, including the call list, notification, engagement. As mentioned, they're very close to an agreement with the Nez Perce on the fish passage and what type there, and then ODFW. And then they've got some initial engineering reports complete, and they should have their PER done here within the next 2 to 3 months. So the expected ask is going to be somewhere between 20 and 30 million, and that, depending on what the final report says and what options they go with, that might be low. We're not sure yet, because when they looked at this effort back in, I think it was 2001, there's an estimate of like 37 million to do it. So we're not quite sure, but it'd be up there. But we're starting to engage the stakeholders, and we're helping them connect with people so that hopefully by the end of the year or early first quarter, we might be able to get to a point where we can actually look at this project. So the relevance to OTC is obviously around the impact if it fails, and then also supporting that effort as they actually get built out, and the impact then to the local roads and lines of communication. So,
Quick question, who constructed the dam? Under what authority was it constructed?
it was the Associated Ditch Company, and it was about 1913, I believe. And it was just the local folks that were impacted that kind of formed this association, and they kind of just constructed it. And then the Water Department and Bureau of Reclamation is kind of looked at it subsequently.
Does it require federal licensing to redo it?
It's privately owned, so I don't believe so.
Okay, so it's
No.
totally off of that system. Okay,
And that's why it's also been
Yeah.
a challenge on the funding,
Yeah.
because they just don't. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, unlike the situation in Bend, right?
Yeah, exactly. We wanted to give it back.
Nice.
But I think you raise a good point in terms of we can either spend the money now in a preventative fashion, or we can spend the money on the opposite side when we have the destruction. So I'm grateful to see that pre-planning is happening and that the costs are going down apparently.
Yeah.
So that's great. Courtney, did you have a comment?
Yeah, the only other thing I also wanted to add was, like Brian said, I think they're only at 72% capacity right now in the lake. If they were to go up to 100%, it would impact the state park at the other end, which could have additional transportation impacts. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Phil Stenbeck. I'm the new DLCD representative, so I started in March of this year, a few months on the job. It's been absolutely enjoyable working with the RST team here, and Ken, I just wanted to compliment you on your staff. You've heard our team talk about the number of different projects that we're working on and their effect on transportation. Additionally, DLCD has been given direction from the legislature to spend some dollars both in economic opportunities analysis in the housing areas to enhance Eastern Oregon's economic opportunities. It's an area of the state that has not seen quite as much of an uplift with the turning of the economy as other areas has, and so it's been struggling. The legislators and the state legislators in this area have gone to the legislature and have asked for dollars, and the dollars were handed to DLCD to work with in two areas, housing and EOAs. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with those terms are. The connection that I wanted to mention was the $300,000 we're working with in Eastern Oregon having to do with EOAs, which is an economic opportunities analysis. We'll take a look at a number of industrial sites that are maybe sitting silent, that are assets, reuse of different facilities. And what you'll find is over the next 12 months, this work has to be done by June 30 of next year. We'll be completing outreach to 8 of the counties in the Eastern 12, what it was referred to as the Eastern 12 in terms of the area of the state that the dollars are to be spent, in about, I want to say, 18 cities. And so in the coming months, you'll find us talking about economic opportunities analysis and reuse of sites that hopefully are going to improve the economy in Eastern Oregon. At the same time, as you're probably aware, housing has been a major issue for a number of years now. And so the legislature has given DLCD dollars for across the state in this instance, but we're also, of course, doing this in Eastern Oregon as we're working with some communities that have been identified as having especially difficult housing situations to try and move the needle forward in terms of creating an environment where housing is more easily achieved depending on what kind they need. So what you'll find is it's not all the same housing issue. Some has to do with workers, some has to do with low income. We're even hearing for high income homes in some areas, for instance, the cost of building a foundation is significantly higher because the transportation of concrete is several hours. You don't have, as Nick put it, a pumper truck in the county. and so it has to come from LeGrand or somewhere. So those are some of the things that DLCD is bringing to the table as a part of this team, and that we'll do our best to make sure it meshes very well with the Transportation Commission's mission.
I suspect you're partnering with Oregon Housing and Community Services as well on some of those housing needs and
Yes.
matching up. Okay, leverage
Yes.
those funds.
Yep.
Great.
So Chair Boehner, members of the Commission, Director Garrett and staff, thanks again for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I will say that if the legislature were to order bills in order of importance, then you would note that preceding House Bill 2017 was House Bill 2012, the Eastern Oregon Border Bill. So as a quick reminder, I think we talked about this with the Commission last time. The Eastern Oregon Border Bill was created by then Representative Benson and Speaker Kotek during the 2017 session. It did a couple things. First of all, it created the Eastern Oregon Border Economic Development Region, which the description is rather complex, but it's essentially Ontario, Nissa, Vale, Adrian, and kind of the Willow Creek, Brogan area. It created a board, 7 members appointed by the governor, and it charged that board with developing and implementing strategies and practices to improve workforce and economic development opportunities within the border region. And it gave the board $5 million for grant and loan programs they can use to invest in workforce and economic development opportunities. And then lastly, the bill also allows the board to make recommendations to state agency boards and commissions and the legislature on impediments they see that put the border region at a competitive disadvantage with Idaho. So where we are now, the board was appointed in December of 2017. They've started their first meetings January of 2018. They've been meeting every month, and so far, I would say they've had a really thoughtful, diligent effort. They've been inviting state and local workforce and economic development experts and practitioners to come to board meetings to kind of learn about these issues. They have solicited the community for priority issues that community feels might be creating some of these competitive disadvantages. And they're looking at the information they've gathered from both a policy perspective, what are the policy issues, and then what are the areas that may be addressed through some kind of funding opportunity. Where they have currently created they've identified 6 areas. They have 6 subcommittees that are currently operating, gathering additional information. Those are CTE and technical training programs. And as you may be familiar, that area has been working on technical education opportunities for a long time through the Poverty to Prosperity effort that's been going on. And they, the border area is challenged to have some of the workforce needs to meet the employment opportunities there. Meanwhile, across the border in Idaho, they have all kinds of really great technical education programs. So they're looking at how can we increase technical education opportunities for students within the border region. Trade and performance certification requirements. They are more strict, many of them, in Oregon than they are in Idaho. So particularly for some of the electrician certifications, some of the nursing things. So it's hard to attract some of those skilled, certified workers into the border region to work. So they're looking at some recommendations in that area. Energy and natural resources. What they have found here, their big issue, we heard from economic development folks, is that there's a lot of industrial land, as you may recall, in Malheur County. It's very it's high quality, close to transportation infrastructure. But one of the issues that has caused the area to lose projects is that power costs more in Ontario than it does across the border in Idaho. And one reason for that are some tariffs that are put on power generated by Idaho Power but sold in Oregon. So they're looking at kind of what's at the root of that difference and what kind of flexibility may be able to be exercised. Broadband is another committee they formed. I think they recognize broadband is going to be the foundation of economic, and frankly, education and healthcare opportunities in the future as well. So they're looking at the broadband capacity within the border region and making sure they can compete with larger urban areas in Idaho and Oregon. They are looking at public assistance programs and how those may cause a disincentive to work in Oregon as opposed to Idaho. And they've kind of done some initial studies, and what they found is that in Oregon you can essentially get 97% of the median family or median household income in assistance programs Well, in Idaho, you can get like, I think it's less than 30%. So what the concern is that we have, people moving into Oregon for our assistance programs, but not wanting to work. Now, so that's a lot of the people we talk with, the Department of Human Services, they question whether that data is valid or not. But it's something the board is looking into to try to get a better handle on. What can they do to kind of tilt that to the favor of people that want to work in Oregon? And then the last thing that has come up is land use. No surprise there. I think that's been a hot topic in Malheur County for a long, long time. In this case, though, the board is looking at it from the perspective of workforce housing development. And kind of what they've seen is that in Idaho, there's been a lot more construction on the Idaho side of the river than there has been in Oregon. And what seems to be favored are those kind of urban, rural residential housing developments. And so they're looking at, how can they allow housing development on low-value farmland in Oregon. And as the board has said, they don't want to be, they appreciate the values of land use. They don't want to be Idaho, but they'd like to have a little more flexibility than currently exists in Oregon. And on that issue, it sounds like they will be advancing some kind of policy recommendation to the legislature in the 2019 session. Exactly what that looks like, Phil, to be determined. But
Well, I think it's important to note that you would have a lot of other county partners
yes,
who would want to join in on that as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, I think that one is ripe with interest.
yes, it is.
And so they'll be making that recommendation in the 2019 session. At the same time, they're also looking at kind of how should they structure their grant and loan programs to utilize that $5 million. There's opportunities to invest in infrastructure. The state has recently the Regionally Significant Industrial Sites Program, which allows communities, local governments to invest in industrial land infrastructure. And then when you land a company, to get that money back in the form of a portion of income taxes paid by employees that work on these sites. So there's the opportunity potentially for the board to invest in infrastructure within the border area and then get the money back again for an additional investment. So there's all kinds of interesting opportunities they're kind of sawing through right now. And they're also kind of looking at additional opportunities to collaborate with other people that work in the economic development and workforce space within the region. And then I want to touch real quickly, and if you have additional questions on the border bill, please let me know. But Courtney mentioned a little bit about the incentive that was received by Oregon Torrefaction and how they, one of the requirements on that was that they build a workforce pipeline in partnership with workforce providers and local school districts to kind of create a manufacturing workforce pipeline. And the issue behind that really that we hear in Grant County and all over the rest of Eastern Oregon, probably the whole state, is that we just have a shortage of people to work there. I could probably, at any given day, there are 1,000 jobs available in Eastern Oregon that can't be filled. And so the concept has been it's hard to attract people to this part of the state. It's a great part of the place to live, but it's not for everyone. So how do we make sure that the kids we have here are skilled up and aware of the job opportunities we have? We're doing a similar kind of project that we just did in Malheur County, where a company that will store and pack sweet potatoes, they were located in Idaho. We've recruited them into Oregon. They're going to create 40 new jobs. But part of their incentive there was to, they will be creating kind of a workforce ladder, if you will. They have a predominantly Hispanic workforce, so it will be a strategy to make sure that their workforce has the skills and the education they need to work up the employment ladder within the company. And in addition, they're going to be providing $10,000 a year in scholarships for children of employees to help them get the kind of skills they need to be competitive in the workforce of the region. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Yeah. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
What did you say this company manufactures?
This is a company, the one that's in Nissa. They are it's sweet potato.
Sweet
they grow sweet potatoes, but they'll be packing and storing them in Nissa. And of interest, one reason for their move to Nissa was the interest in the reload opportunity as well. Yeah.
Just encourage that in that looking at policies and impediments to economic development, if there's anything on the transportation side, obviously we'd be open to discussing what that might be. We want to make sure that the region is prospers and you have what you need. It's always encouraging to get outside of Salem and see what's happening out in communities, and it's encouraging to see the partnerships and just the creativity of making things work. So very proud of this region and all that you've put in and the investment of time and effort. It doesn't happen, it's very intentional. And I think you're making your mark in Salem in terms of that this region matters. I think it really does. So to the entire state's economic vitality. So thank you for your commitment.
Well, thank you, Chair Bainey. I just want to echo what Phil said. You know, ODOT is a fabulous partner, and Director Garrett, I hope you know this as well. They really are a great partner in Eastern Oregon. I know, you know, Business Oregon, generally people love us when we come to communities because we're not a regulatory agency. But I have to compete with ODOT for love in this region, and it's kind of... So I just want you all to know your staff is doing a great job out here.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. And we're going to just take a 3-minute break very quickly as we change over to the next Regional Solutions panel. Opportunity to get refreshed. And now we have an opportunity to hear from our ACT.
Thank you, Commissioner Bainey and Commission. Welcome.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, Director, Governor, staff, we appreciate the fact that you're here in Southeast Oregon, so far away from the rest of the world. Appreciate the fact that you come. Also, members of the Governor's staff, thank you. Representative Finley, I know he's in the room somewhere. Our staff from the Congressional Office, Senator staff, thank you. And I believe, I hope I haven't left anybody out, but at any rate, I'll let our SEAC members introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Angie Jones. I'm the District Manager for Grant County Transportation District and the Transportation Rep.
So welcome, Pete Reynolds, Harney County Judge.
Jim Merritt, City of Nissa.
Nick Green, John Day.
Commissioner Jim Hampshire and Mayor of Prairie City.
We wanted to have a dialogue. It can be relatively informal and kind of observations of things that you want us to know. We are in your neck of the woods. We did go on a tour this morning and see some of the projects happening and different things. And I'm grateful to get out of Salem, as we've mentioned before, too. It's nice to be able to see what's happening within the states. But we also wanted to get some feedback in terms of how things, funding is going, role. I know that we have your bylaws as well. Transit, how is that going? We have clearly some new funding coming along the line, capacity. So really it's meant to be a dialogue to let us know what we wouldn't know already in terms of the interaction with the Act and what you need from us even in terms of meeting your needs. So we could start with the questions here. The appropriate role and the Act funding, obviously right now without or however you'd like to have the conversation. So, yes.
I think we're going to go through the changes to the bylaws first, and then
wonderful.
Then we'll go with the questions.
We are here at your pleasure,
Okay.
so you just whatever you'd like to.
So our changes were mild, not many this year. Of course, updated the years. The biggest change was through our bylaws. We referenced the Southeastern Oregon Regional Alliance, SRA. That committee has been defunct for years. The only really thing that remains of it is a small loan portfolio with GEODC, Greater Eastern Oregon Development Corporation. So going through our bylaws, we took that out completely. Page 4 had SEAC structure and membership. It referenced that in 5 of the 4 lines. Reference that in all 5 lines. We left 2, geographic coverage being Grant, Harney, and Malheur counties have established uniform regional boundaries like other state programs. Our public meetings throughout the region, transportation has consistently been identified as one of the top regional issues. Membership reflects the same. On page 5, it reflects who the members, what makes up our membership. Grant County, Harney County, Malheur County court members, representatives of Grant, Harney, Malheur, different ODOT representatives, bike, ped, transit, freight. We added a representative for Business Oregon representative, ex officio. Mr. Fairley, thank you for that. Don't know if we told him though. Operations of SEAC, we getting things coordinated so that one thing says agreement, another thing says agreement versus bylaws or act or different things. So we're try to be more uniform. And at the back of our charter, there is an amendment. That amendment solely dealt with the SRA, Southeast Oregon Regional Alliance. We have deleted that altogether. Pretty much the changes in the charter. A few typos or spellings. Work plan remained identical, updated, no changes to that, updated the years. And in our operating bylaws, we removed, it references officers shall consist of a chair and a vice or co-chair selected by voting membership. We removed vice all the way through. This act works with 2 co-chairs. Usually selected, usually made up of the 3 county commissioners. Deleted a line that said it was held in conjunction with the Southeast Regional Alliance, which no longer exists. And the makeup of the board on the back, reference names, we cleaned that up. So this one just solely represents the positions in the communities and who makes that up. Then we have an operating one for our working papers. One line I did miss, we did add as one of the local governments, transit important districts, and we also added the intermodal reload facility now to want them included and recognized in this plan. So anybody else on the committee thinks I left anything out, please speak up.
Nope.
Okay.
Get the formality out of the way. Do any of the commission members have any comments or edits? If not, I would welcome a motion, and the motion is noted. It's approving the updated charter work plan and bylaws.
So moved.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries unanimously. So other conversation points?
Okay, let's talk transit.
Let's do.
Okay, so regionally, our needs are very, very similar. All 3 counties we're highly rural or pretty rural, with Harney and Grant being actually highly rural. In Grant County, as in the other counties, we have a high percentage of low-income individuals. So this STIF money this House Bill 2017 money is just wonderful. We're very happy to have it, very thankful for all the hard work that the legislature and everyone has put into it. So we are, each 3 of the counties, we are moving forward on our bylaws. In Grant County, our committee's been appointed, the bylaws have been adopted, and we're moving through public comment on our priority list. In the other counties, they are working on their bylaws and committee appointments and have put together lists and working through the public process. So we're getting geared up for it. We all 3 plan to apply the first round. We hope to be ready. I know Grant County, we will be ready. And the other 2 have a few things to kind of get tightened up because they operate differently. Grant County is the qualified entity, Grant County Transportation District. We are the qualified entity, so we don't have to go through the county courts, which the other 2 do. So it's a little bit smoother process for us. But overall, it's going very well. Public comment on our priority lists is coming in slow, but we've had a lot of feedback in Grant County in particular. We are looking at putting together a deviated fixed route, which will be essentially what you would find in an urban area, a fixed route, but could deviate to go to a location to pick someone up when the bus is scheduled to pass that location. Then it returns to the route and finishes the location. In Grant County, it will serve 4 of the communities. It will serve Mount Vernon, Canyon City, John Day, and Prairie City. And all passengers who ride that route will ride for free. So it eliminates a big barrier right there. Currently, our fares are pretty low, $1, $2, but the folks that ride this route will be riding completely for free. We will be applying for some of the competitive grants because our last regional connection that we're missing for Grant County is Ontario. And that would also allow us to connect all of the smaller communities along the way. Unity, Brogan, Jameson, Ironside, Willow Creek, and even Vale. So we would be able to do that, and that again is our last regional connection that we're missing. We have a pretty robust program here in Grant County. We travel into Bend 3 days a week. We go into Pendleton, Walla Walla weekly, and we alternate between Burns and Baker City every other week. So that's our last connection that we're missing, and there are quite a few folks that are excited about that as well.
So in terms of the application and in terms of the communication, any observations or things that you would want us to know? Did we miss anything? Was it a heavy lift in terms of being able to get your plan put together? Just help us to understand on the ground what it looks like, because we create these great ideas and then sometimes it's not always great.
Right. So, of course, because it's a brand new thing, it's been challenging and there's a lot of upfront work. The plan itself, putting that together, getting all of the requirements met, initially is challenging, but for the next round, it will be a lot smoother. So initially, there is a ton of work, and I can say that my board of directors initially looked at all of these rules that I put in front of them, and they're like, oh no. And I'm like, it's okay, we can do it. And I'm sure that the county courts have been in the same position. So initially, that upfront work, it's a lot. And it's cumbersome. Thankfully, we have a really wonderful RTC with ODOT and Frank Thomas. He's been super, super helpful and listening, and Marcia has been wonderful as well. So they've helped, I know they've helped me with a bunch of obstacles that I've had, and I'm sure that they've helped the other counties as well.
Great. And it's nice to hear one of the priorities that we had is making sure that particularly the smaller communities had added capacity from the ODOT team to make sure that you could be competitive and get those plans in alongside anyone else. So, but understanding that your capacity needs look a little different than a Salem or somewhere else. So, great, please.
I'm curious about one thing. You talked about this deviated route. Mm-hmm. How much notice does someone need to provide you for the deviation off the route for pickup?
We would be asking them to call the afternoon before. We will still keep our regular demand response service in play. The only difference is that there will be a fare charged for the demand response as opposed to the deviated route.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell us how it's going in Malheur County?
We're working with Frank Thomas, and he's doing a really good job. There's some grant applications that he's working on right now, and we were just a little bit confused on some of the language, and he's working on it. It's no different than what Angie's talking about, and I think probably at our next county court meeting we'll be able to work through that. But it's working really well.
So the same in Harney County. Frank is a godsend, from what my director tells me. We've also added a fixed route. I can't remember if we deviate off that or not. Yeah, I think we do, yeah. Seems like it's the afternoon before they also have to call. But I believe we're charging $1. I don't think it's free. But it was forced upon us. We were going so many different directions so much of the time that we actually were running out of funds. So we had to put in the fixed route to get people from using the call your cab type scenario. But we'll provide scheduled ahead trips to Boise, Portland, Bend, Redmond, anywhere a person needs. And there's a graduated scale there. Several years when I had my own business, I also was the stop for Eastern Point to come through. And I do sit on the PTAC board. And I had made the suggestion once, because that's a subsidized route. And there was a time when I thought we might have an opportunity to pick that subsidized route up within our, senior center provides our dial-a-ride services. And how can we do that instead of the state having to pay to pick up this other route? And we're already out there, you already fund us. How could we work together to make that link between Bend and Ontario, and coordinate with Grant County, bringing people either down to Burns to make it more inclusive? I think the point is a good service. You're great. I know we're on either end, though, you're tied to Greyhound schedules. But maybe it's time they stopped calling the shots and we did. I think we can do it better. So that's my comments on transportation.
Any other public transportation pieces? Okay. Are you, please, yes.
Angie, I appreciate a pretty comprehensive review here as it rippled through your colleagues here. I think what I heard is there has been an aggressive lean forward to ensure that you're enhancing capacity within your own county. You're even reaching out on those regional type connections here. That networking, what's the conversation about now? You know, you get the first phase out, get your own house in order, so to speak. But I think one of the opportunities that comes with this new wave of funding, maybe the next discussion, and it may bring in the point service, right? That's a legitimate discussion to have because it is about leveraging opportunities. As you look at all three counties now, what's a conversation that is or may play itself out in terms of networking all those assets to truly continue to grow and connect the eastern part of the state?
So at this time, I have worked pretty closely because we go into Pendleton, Walla Walla. I've worked with Umatilla County on that route. It was originally started through our Highly Rural Veterans Transportation Grant, and we stop in Ukiah, which is completely unserviced by public transportation out of Umatilla County at this time. So this is just an example. When we were starting that program, and I was talking with Umatilla County about what we could do, because we wanted to stop there, we wanted to help them, what we could do to help the folks in Umatilla County. They weren't, as a whole, weren't able to provide a lot of assistance, especially financial assistance. It was, you know, kudos, great job, very happy that it was going, folks are being served. But it took a citizen within the community of Ukiah who became extremely vocal because on our veterans transportation trips, our veterans are, they ride for free to medical appointments. There is no fare. And so this particular individual in Ukiah, he's a veteran, you know, qualified veteran, but we could not allow him to ride for free because he was not a Grant County resident. So he got really vocal. And he went to county commissioner, called Senator Wyden's office even. It's, anyway, his vocal ability in county, and they now purchase bus passes for all of the residents in Ukiah for free on our buses. And we have residents that ride with us every single week because we're the only public transportation. And we go over in the morning and back in the Ontario, not if, but when we start Ontario. Unity is in Baker County. We haven't been able to get to work any kind of agreements on fund sharing for these areas, although Baker County was looking at the potential for purchasing bus tickets for their veterans out of Sumter, out of Baker County. Harney County was in the same boat when we started the Highly Rural Grant. They weren't on board with it yet. They are now. We haven't had further discussion on that. And as we progress into increasing the routes, expanding it farther, I will be having conversations with Malheur County and revisit Baker and Harney County as well, because increased service and demand only are going to benefit all of us.
Angie, thank you. And Madam Chair, I appreciate you allowing me to ask the question. I have to applaud your vision, your leadership, and the initiative perfectly in alignment with the Commission, as well as the Joint Committee on Transportation that forwarded and created that new payroll tax that funds the STF. So well done. I think you've set a very high bar.
Thank you. Do you have base funding prior to House Bill 2017, or are you just strictly grant funded?
Okay, we're strictly grant funded. We don't levy any taxes.
That right there is a small miracle that you've been able to operate And then also now this added capacity, I bet is just transformational in terms of the capacity. So do we want to, observations, maybe we'll start it, so Judge, do you want to walk us through that, or if you have
I think we went through a lot, but I've got a comment on number 3.
Okay.
So the commissioners wrestle with our input sometimes. And so I know there's a process that you go through. And we started it last fall in one particular area, and it hasn't happened since probably almost a year ago. So in the safety side of it, I think that's really, really important to take that kind of input. The turnout issue, the turn lanes, and then where you're in as opposed to being in Salem, well, we don't have any congestion whatsoever. But we have people that probably, if there was, I sometimes think more education on safety, it'd be helpful when people come up behind you and they tailgate you. And I think the ticket should be higher, like $1,000 a pop, and then that might fix that one. But at any rate, so those are just some of the issues that I see out there. But education is probably number one. Because if you don't pay attention when you're going down the road, you're going to get in a wreck. And just like what happened Monday morning or Sunday morning, on 78, So it was at 10 o'clock in the morning. How do you not pay attention?
Judge, if you'd like some congestion, we can send some over. We have quite a bit over in our part of the state.
But I think what we heard on the listening tours is that I think are critical. But from a state perspective of how do we make sure that we are making the appropriate investments so that we can be competitive as a state too, was really a recognition that we were learning from all 4 corners of the state about how that was, the congestion in the metro area was causing an issue there too. So that was part of the congestion piece for us.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate all the work that Director Garrett does and you guys do as volunteers.
So
we do appreciate it.
So we did reduce some, raised and then reduced some speeds in other parts of the state. So how about we do an offline discussion about that?
I think that's important. I think I can become part of that conversation, so.
Thank you, sir.
If I could, I'd like to just speak briefly to a potential role for the Act. And that was a rather thick transportation package, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on every nuance of it. But we've worked together, the folks in our Act, for many years to the extent that we can preserve local autonomy in some of the decision-making, or at least in the prioritization around some of the programs. Special cities allotment increase was a huge boon for us. Just to put it in perspective, John Day gets about 90, prior to 2017, we got about 90,000 a year in our street fund. Can't do a whole lot with that. The 4X increase to the SCA, we were able to put in just this year for 200,000. So we're looking at a 3 to 4X increase. It's huge. We can often round out projects with some money, but it's hard to stretch no money. And the minimum amount we got prior to this this bill passing was just enough to keep the lights on. So to the extent that we prioritize internal to the Act, and I'm not advocating for a legislative change necessarily, but we see some pretty interesting maneuvers. Our OHV vehicles, as we have 2 state highways, our main street, and to allow where we could say, can we allow ATV use within incorporated city limits or within an urban region? We're trying to promote a recreation economy. We're surrounded by 2 million acres of national forest, but it's awkward to access them locally. You have to put your ATV on a trailer and then cart it 5 miles down the road to avoid driving on state highway. So I wouldn't recommend that an Act make sweeping changes to affect the entire transportation network for the state. But if we have the ability to make policy recommendations within the Act to say, hey, within our community, this makes sense, we can create the safety parameters that we need to Many of these are as expensive or more expensive than a car. That would be a role that would enhance our economic value and would help us preserve some of that local control that home rule really emphasizes, even if there has to be central control over the funding and decision-making.
I think that's exactly the type of conversation that we would want to have, and being able to advise us on things that are impacting your communities. So I'm encouraged to hear you say that. Please.
If I may, I agree wholeheartedly with Judge Joyce in the fact that my same concerns come with safety first within our roads, and our community as well has been working on a speed issue within our community for almost a year, some months anyway, and so I think we have to be very careful of how we look at those. As a rural community, sometimes the roads vary in how they work. And the particular road I'm talking about, there's a school that's on the outskirts of town, and so when you come around a basic bend, it goes from 20 miles an hour in a school zone to 45 with a matter of feet. I personally witnessed very near bus accidents and children accidents, but it seems like it's very difficult to get those speeds limits lowered. It's been a very arm-twisting type of an event with not very much success. And so I think that we need to look within the safety of these particular incidents. And each one has to be an individual. I think you have to look at each one as somewhat individual and not as a blanket, and consider each one. And that's what I would ask for, is on your level and on the local level, that we could look at those and have a little more influence on how that works within our, at least give influence in our community, and have it looked at a little heavier.
And I'm also hearing you say, and Director Garrett, we may want to also revisit this. What is the timeline for turnaround in terms of answers, or do we need to look at how long it's taking to get a response or decision? Because if we're over a year here and a year here, obviously each one is unique, but should there be an expectation of an answer?
No, I have been working, and ODOT has worked with us on this. We just haven't got there yet. And I'm not saying that they haven't, because I think ODOT is a great partner. They are a great partner for us, and we have gone in a good direction. It's just, it seems like on their end, because it's no fault to them at all. It's just a process to go through, and if we could shorten that process up somehow, I think it would help.
There's one thing we know you love our ODOT team here.
I'll tell you what.
So I'm not taking it as
they are awesome,
yes,
and they're awesome to work with.
We agree.
Their hands are tied just as the same as anyone else's. If we could get some way to maybe loosen that up just a little bit, I think it would help. But ODOT's awesome to work with.
Sometimes it's not the local region folks, sometimes it's just us. So that's what it is.
And I'm not blaming you either. I want to thank you for this kid for the small cities money. It's amazing. So it helps us. We went through the winter of Wintergeddon, and we had streets that you could actually probably hide in if you were wanting to battle on the street. You had foxholes in it, and so that's helping us reduce roads. And so very fortunate on that. So, and we do appreciate ODOT 100%.
So, Madam Chair and Director, on one of the issues that Jim and I are working on, I think I don't know whether it's by administrative rule or what, but the process could be reversed, and it might simplify it. And we can actually talk offline about that one if it's okay. Thank you.
Following up on that, there's a similar issue I've had in just outside of Hines, and talked to my regional folks, and they have to go through the study. But to me, that's where the confusion gets in, because it's about speed. It's not about speed, it's about safety. And if they put safety ahead of it, you could save a lot of time and money on that study, because they've warned me, be careful what you ask for, because sometimes the study might come back the opposite and almost speed it up. I think it needs to be looked at, like Judge said, it's case-by-case basis. And they then decide if it's speed or safety, and then have a route to go either way. So that was touching on that. In number 3, question between preservation, safety, and congestion. So we'll give you a break from congestion. Our biggest congestion is sometimes we have to have cattle drive. We have to slow traffic down and move things around. And we have cooperation from ODOT and state police on that. But since the speed limit went up, Highway 20, Bend, Ontario, has become, I don't want to say an Autobahn, but it's getting close. There is no respect for speed out there. There's no respect for passing on the blind hills. I read it every day on social media when I get on Facebook. Be careful. I read the 911 dispatch log daily, and the folks that call in and report a truck that did this, and not just trucks, there's cars too, but they try to call ahead and either go into Malheur County or if it's going the other way to the chutes. But it's a big issue. But on that, as far as safety goes, I asked ODOT last year, our way station just this side of Burns was closed a few years back. They occasionally come open it up. It's been open 6 days in the last 2 years. 455 trucks in those 6 days. 2 citations, 5 warnings, averaged about 76 trucks a day. But I went to him because I asked if there was a way that the county could open it up. And does that happen in other parts of the state? And the county does run some way stations. So we want to move forward on that. When they closed it down, we lost roughly $40,000 a year, fines coming through, which benefit us all to help with the roads. So the answer was, sure, when do you want the key? We didn't quite get there, but I'm ready to do it this year. So I called here just in the last week and was told, well, yeah, we'll be glad to work with you on that, but that one's been scheduled to be closed in the next few years. And I think that's a mistake. And it's not just weight violations, it's the trucking violation, it's the safety violations, it's the things that are wrong on the truck, they're not strapped proper or anything like that. I want to go forward with this and put a county employee in there for safety. And I would hope, and what he said was that the scale is breaking down, it'd be about a $10,000 fix. I think one of the sidewalls must be crumbling, is the way he explained it to me. And if the county needs to put that up to make our roads safer, this isn't going to be a money-making venture for us. It's all about safety, and I'm willing to take that step for our county and everybody that travels that highway. When that speed limit run up, we saw a definite increase in truck traffic and the speeds of citizens and cars.
So it goes back to that enforcement piece as well. So let's bookmark that discussion as Director Garrett too. And maybe there's a partnership there to be had. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And that's, I mean, this is the beauty of us getting this kind of a dialogue, to be able to hear what are those, I mean, that may not be for an overall state issue. That's not going to show up on the radar. But for your community and for the safety and the enforcement of the laws, it matters. So that's one of the values. So please, any other? Commissioner, awful quiet there at the end. Nope, all right.
I'll go again.
Go, please.
Number 1, appropriate is understanding when the projects will be rolled out, timing, completion dates, et cetera, will be helpful to us to notify our community. Our county court's gone out and had rural meetings, and one of the comments I heard is truck traffic, well, people pulling off, so if they're going to turn to Druzy or to Buchanan, there's no turn lanes. Or just a shoulder to pull off on to turn. And so I asked regional folks, when was a good time to try to get, because there's a freight mobility project going to come through that area, part of this House bill. And is it a good time for us to when do we make the proper notification that, hey, can we do a turn lane at the same time we're right here? Because this freight mobility is about these slow trucks and then the backup of cars, and then once there's an opening, the Autobahn opens back up. Everybody just goes crazy to get around them. So notification of when, and how do we look at a local concern? That, you know, maybe it can be addressed, maybe it can't, but at least get it in the hopper ahead of time.
And I think what Judge Reynolds is saying is public notification, I guess. Public notification is very important in all these, because if we can involve the public so they have some information feel is relative to what's going on. I think that's a good thing, and for timing wise and when what's happening and what's going to go on. And that's part of us. We have to be doing that, but we have to have enough information so that we can go forward with the public so they understand what's going on and why it's happening. And I will blame myself for part of that. If I could get some notification when things were going to happen, I can get it out a little better.
Question?
Yes. This is a dialogue, so please just jump in.
To the county representatives, what do you think is the most effective means of communication in a rural area like this?
Getting it to the county level, to the courts or the commissioners. From there, we have several ways. In Harney County, we don't have a radio station that does any type of news reporting. It's just basically a music channel. But we can get it to the newspaper. We can get it to the Facebook pages that almost every county agency has. That's really our most effective way in my area.
I'm a bit of a lead foot, so I'm going to offer to drive down to Harney County to contribute to those fines just to keep them going. But so I can't really comment on safety without being a hypocrite. But I will say for congestion relief, and this may be indirect, I'm curious what the state's plans are for autonomous vehicles and specifically driverless freight. We have a very unique environment out here. A lot of curvature to our highways, a lot of elevation change, but very low population density and relatively minor traffic on our highways. In Pendleton, they have the aerial UAV test bed program, which is in the NE Act. If the state were interested in a location to test driverless freight, to work out policy implications, to look at opportunities to innovate, that's certainly something I'd be interested in, a corridor between John Day and some of the regional communities to really dial in what are the technical hurdles, what are the policy hurdles. That would be certainly in line with the goals and priorities of our community, and we know it's coming. I mean, I think that the tie into congestion is that the autonomous vehicles don't do the stop and go as much. They certainly have a better crash rating than us humans do. But there are a lot of challenges in implementing programs like that. So to help us catch up with the technology, that may be an opportunity to explore.
So this, we just had a oh, please, go right ahead.
I had a very lengthy conversation with a gentleman from Peterbilt when we were in San Francisco area about the autonomous vehicles. Their look right now is putting these types of vehicles on the interstate system because that's where they think they have the most effective impact on congestion and freight movement and everything else. He showed me around the entire vehicle, showed me all the radar, all the LiDAR, cameras. I mean, it's an elaborate vehicle, but their testing right now is going on in Southern California on the interstate system, and I would say, and in Arizona, but I would say it's going to be quite a long time before that technology is appropriate for the types of rural highways you're talking about.
Yes, then that's an excellent point. We were just at a tri-state meeting with Washington and California, and we were there, had a chance to tour a facility where they actually, it's a small city-type environment and doing some of the testing. The state of Oregon does have an autonomous vehicle task force, and there's a recommendation that's going to be, I believe they have a report that's out in September. But I think you're right. How can we be using some of the less populated areas that have a lot of miles to be doing some testing? And I think what we don't know is what might be necessary in the future, but I think that linkage into that committee. Brendan, I'm looking at you. I don't know if there's a website to follow that work by chance. Do you know if any of that is up yet? And if no's the answer, that's fine too. But, oh, okay, we got a thumbs up in the back. So I don't know if you're following that work already.
I will begin following it,
okay.
and primarily because you may have noticed we're about 2 hours from the nearest interstate. So
Yeah.
How do we get those driverless vehicles to a place like John Day? If the answer is you don't, then either they've got to be offloaded and reloaded, or we're going to continue to fall further and further behind. So I
Exactly.
will follow that closely and and keep hoping.
I'm not saying they're not going to end up here eventually, but given the state of the technology that we saw, it's going to be a while.
They're not ready. Yeah.
Madam Chair, if I may, Mr. Gates, you raise a very good point. I think it's about relationships. We're in the front end. The Autonomous Vehicle Task Force, their focus has been, if you've been watching the conversations, have really been on testing. Next stage is deployment on this thing. I think as we turn to truck platooning and that thing, I think this is about relationships. I think building relationships. Daimler is a partner that we've tested on I-84. I think conversations there, Stone Throwaway and Madras, they've got a nice little facility there. But I think there's a legitimate conversation with some of the individuals because it is industry that really is driving some of this conversation. And I think if you can invest some time in maybe those relationships, at least that's one front to take on the question you posed.
Help us dream. Yep. Other comments? Please.
Just one last one for me, Madam Chair. I heard the conversation on tolling a little while ago, and I'm really excited about that. So I got a bill from Colorado here a couple years ago on my vehicle. I'd never been on a toll road in my life, but I hadn't heard from my son for several months either. So I got about 3 bills, but I think that's a really good way to go because they were able to pick it up quickly. Whatever technology they're using, it does work, and you do pay the bill.
One other issue we're seeing out here, and we dealt with in this spring in Harney County, is Google Maps or all the other map outfitting people, sending people the shortest route, and it's a long way. So we've noticed this on one rural road, especially if you were going from Winnemucca to Bend. It doesn't send you through Burns and Hines. It puts you just outside and cuts off all that. So we had this issue with people noticing just this increase in traffic and high speeds, missing where they had to stop and go left or right, blowing right through out into the field. So we started working on it and tried to connect with Google and the way they had it set up. If you were to get on their phone or app or any type of app, and we didn't get anywhere. And then we had another fatality. This lady was coming from Las Vegas home to Seattle, and her daughter went into labor, and she was trying to find the nearest hospital. So she put it in her phone, and it bypassed Burns, bypassed Hines. It wasn't close enough to pick up a hospital sign. It missed a corner. The pregnant lady and the unborn baby both died. So I happened to be in a meeting that day with Kathleen and Kathy, and I said, I've got a problem. And I'd been working with our regional folks again and seeing if they had any contacts. And through Senator Wyden's office, they got us some numbers and email addresses, basically. But we got the problem resolved. And Google is really good to work with, but that's only half the battle. Because then you got Garmin, TomTom, and all the others, and they don't, Google's the big guy, but they don't all work together. So that's another issue that we're finding that's taking people off the state highways, which are the safest, and causing other issues. But we were able to address it. They were really, really good to work with. But just another issue out here in these rural areas. Short route isn't always the best. So.
Of that in other areas? I mean, I know we have the Wayfinder. Yeah, okay. So I don't know what the answer is, but we might want to take that on.
Trust but verify.
Yeah,
it really
exactly.
is. I mean.
Well, and a couple of years ago, we had a couple that were lost wasn't that in your backyard? Yeah. And that was another tragic event. So, our need to believe just what's right in front of us. So there's some human error there, too. Thank you very much. Look at us be responsive. What else can we solve? How about world peace? Okay, other comments or questions, thoughts, things that you want us to know? Well, let me say that the commitment of time on an act is not lost on us. We know that you have other work that you need to do, and it's this interaction that matters a great deal for us to know what your priorities are, but also what the challenges are, and how we can assist in helping with the livability and the economic vitality of your regions. So thank you for that. Judge Joyce, did you have your finger on the button there?
I was just thinking about Representative Finley. He's the only member that was in, I don't know where he's at, but he was the only member I know of that's ever been on ACT that became a state rep, so congratulations.
Yeah, he's been wonderful to work with, and I think he's in an important seat right now, too. So it's an important voice to make sure he's at the legislature. So if there isn't anything else for us, any other questions? Okay. Thank you for the partnership and for making time to be with us today. Hope that those of you that can join us for dinner, we hope that you do. 6 o'clock? Okay. Yes.
Thank
we
you
were giving
very
you a bad
much.
time. Yes, we got into town last night at about 9:01, and we knocked on every door, and we looked hungry and willing to pay. But anyway, so we'll see how it goes tonight.
And the gas stations are also closed, so they're
Well, but
really,
we went to
you're really out
Chester's
of luck.
Thriftway, and we
good.
we got a meal there. So
That was a recent change to 10 p.m. from 9, so you lucked out.
Wonderful. Okay, so Director Garrett, I think next we have the consent agenda, and like to.
I think Commissioner Van Brocklen has indicated like to do is pull forward the consent calendar item 3, have a conversation, a motion to move forward, allow Commissioner Van Brocklen to speak to that, make a move, ask for a vote. However that goes, fine, and then we'll come back to the remaining items on the consent calendar, and I'd ask for approval in block since I have not received any concerns or conflicts specific to them.
So let me go ahead and start with, do we have any other conflicts on any other items on the consent agenda outside of item 3? Okay, then I would welcome a motion for item 3.
Before that motion, I would just like to declare that my law firm represents TriMet and on the Southwest Lowell Street, Portland City Limits Section Property Exchange. I therefore have a conflict and would need to recuse myself. We also represent a client on the Oregon 8 at Oregon 219 and Southeast 44th to 45th Avenue at Hillsborough. These are both unrelated to these specific matters, but they're both clients, both the client here on this Tualatin Valley number 29 project and also this Lowell Street project, and therefore I will need to recuse myself from those matters. And in light of that, I think in an abundance of caution, I'll just recuse myself from the entire all of the right-of-way discussion, deliberation, and voting. So carry on.
Excellent. So I would welcome a motion.
I just want to be clear. So Commissioner Van Brocklen, do you want us to pull out those items as described by the director?
I think I'll just recuse myself from all of item 3 in its entirety.
Okay. So Madam Chair, I would request that we vote on item 3 as a standstill.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll pull that from the consent calendar, and I ask adoption of item 3 on the consent calendar, which is.
It's the acquisition of real property, the approval of that consent calendar item.
Yep. Okay. So moved.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And we have one abstention.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. And with that, and with no conflicts or concerns expressed for consent calendar items 1 and 2, and then 4 through 19, I would ask and request approval of those items in block.
Okay. I welcome a motion.
So moved.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else to come before the commission? Then we are